Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 Oregon Realtors Fair Housing Summit. Hope you have your cup of coffee and some snacks. My name is Molly Mayer, and I am the 2025 Diversity Key Committee Chair for Oregon Realtors. I am honored to be here today with so many dedicated professionals, people who believe, like I do, that real estate is about more than buying and selling homes. It's about building communities where everyone has the right to feel safe, welcome, and valued. Before we dive into today's important conversations, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our presenting advertiser, First American Title. Your commitment to supporting education and fair housing initiatives make events like this possible. Thank you for your partnership. I would also like to sincerely thank our incredible sponsors, Armless, Realtor.com, WFG National Title, Cascade Hassan Sotheby's International Realty, Rise Realty Northwest, and Cross Country Mortgage. Your support demonstrates that fair housing is not just a legal obligation, it's a professional and moral commitment that touches every part of our industry. And of course, thank you, each and every one of you, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here. By choosing to attend, listen, and to learn more about fair housing, you are strengthening not only your practice, but also the communities you serve. Your commitment to growth and leadership is what moves our industry forward. Today, as we gather to learn and reflect, I want to ground us in the foundation of fair housing. The Fair Housing Act protects people from discrimination based on race, color, national origin, religion, sex, including gender identity and sexual orientation, familial status, and disability. These protections aren't just words on a page. They are safeguards of opportunity, dignity, and equality in housing. As we engage in today's panels and discussions, I ask that we all participate with civility and respect. Our ability to listen with an open heart and speak with purpose is vital if we want to be agents of real change. Fair housing isn't just an extra box we check. It is central to who we are as realtors. Upholding fair housing laws is part of our professional code. But more than that, it is an act of leadership. It requires courage to speak up when something isn't right, courage to challenge outdated mindsets, courage to be uncomfortable, and courage to make sure everyone has access to the opportunities that home ownership provides. And at the core of all of this is something even simpler, but no less powerful: the importance of being a kind human. Fair housing is about decency. It's about seeing the humanity in each person we serve and treating every client, neighbor, and community member with fairness, compassion, and respect. Our industry holds immense power to shape neighborhoods, cities, and lives. What we choose to do with that power defines us, not just as realtors, but as people. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for choosing to be a part of the work. Let's make today meaningful, and let's continue to lead with heart, integrity, and purpose. Welcome to the Fair Housing Summit. Let's go. It is my immense pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Harrison Beecher. Harrison is a DC native and father of two, transitioned from D1 football to real estate as managing partner of Coalition's Property Group. Harrison's leadership spans local, state, and national realtor associations, including 2022 President of Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors, 2022 NAR Fair Housing Champion, 2023 GCAAR Realtor of the Year, and 2024 NAR's chair of conference meetings and conference committee. Sorry. A national speaker and coach, Harrison supports realtors nationwide. Welcome, Harrison.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me, Molly. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to share my screen and dive right into it. Okay. Molly, if you can confirm that you can see my screen, okay? All look good to you?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for having me. And again, you've got such an amazing day lined up. And just kudos to your leadership team, to your state association, to your committee that put this on today, because leading these type of conversations in 2025 definitely takes courage. I don't have a ton of time, and I could be up here for hours talking about a subject I'm so passionate about. So I'm going to dive right in and tell you a little bit more just about me and about what we are going to go through today. Let's get our clicking right. One second. Presentation, slideshow. There we go. Go ahead and scan that if you'd like any of the resources that I've got today, especially when we're talking about fair housing. I want to empower people. I want to give, especially real estate professionals, as many tools for your toolbox to go out here and do this impactful work. The main idea of what I'm going to be talking through with you all today is that you've got options. We have options as real estate professionals, and we have ways that we can approach this conversation with our communities, with our peers, and with everybody that we interact with. And if you'll give me one moment, I don't know what's happening technically here with my slides. They're not advancing as they should. I'm not clicking. All right, if that's the case, we're just going to fly with them on another screen there. Annotate, turn off. All right, exit full screen. No, autoplay should not be on. There we go. All right, just gonna click ahead right there. Apologize for the technical delay. My sales team, Coalition Properties Group, has a mission to be the bridge to our community for all things real estate, lifestyle, and wealth building. We operate in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, which is in itself a diverse community. I know that there are some folks that may be coming to this conversation in this space today that are not in diverse places, but I want to encourage you that if you do not have a mission statement that you're currently leading with, that is going to help engage and tell people that you do stand for more. I know that because you showed up today to participate in this convo, but it is impactful if you lead every conversation, every time you're in front of folks with that mission, and this is ours. And our community is big and diverse, and the diversity of our community is what makes it impactful. My business partners and I sell a lot of real estate. I want to, start with showing you that by us leading with a heart of inclusion, with a heart that is focused on fair housing and supporting more folks, you can still do a lot of business. That's going to be a consistent theme throughout what we talk about this morning on my talk, is that there is still space to run a big, large, robust business and be giving back and serving your community at the highest level. Some more details about some of the things we've been able to do in just a calendar year with a heart for giving back at a high level. The most exciting thing we were able to do last year alone was over $50,000 to charitable organizations that we facilitated either through our direct giving or through our clients and community. I want to tell you the story today that you can do both. You can do both at a very high level, and we have been doing it over the last 6 years since we came together at Coalition Properties Group. I was honored in 2022 to be one of NAR's Fair Housing Champions. You got some of the other folks on the call, Lexi and Brian, that bestowed this honor upon me. They just announced the 2025 class. If you're looking for inspiration for how people are stepping up in a very big way to give back to their communities and focus on fair housing, check out the Fair Housing Champion stories. Each year, they're so inspiring, and I was grateful to be a part of this group in 2022. There is a YouTube video that I will share around and make sure you can check out. I also give back at a high level. At each level for our realtor associations. I have found, and I choose to invest my my time specifically with realtor associations because the impact that I know that I can have as either a salesperson or as just somebody operating in the community in my sales business can be enhanced, can be taken to the next level by choosing to invest my time in the realtor association. So Molly is a great example of a leader who's choosing to step up and invest her time, and I know she is getting a tangible return on that investment. So I encourage everybody on this call today, if you've thought at all or had a question of if you should invest some more time at your association? The answer is yes. And what you get back is 10x what you actually invest into it. This is definitely now the time that we need more folks who are passionate, specifically folks that would come to a fair housing summit all day, to be volunteering at every level of our association. Because in the midst of a lot of change from a lot of different fronts, I think coming together and combining both resources, minds, and hearts is how we're going to continue to be able to help communities at a high level. The disclaimer, my words are my own, even though I do serve in a lot of different leadership capacities. I'm here and I'm speaking from lived experience and some research. We are fortunate as members of NAR to have access to a lot of the great data that NAR puts out, which I'm going to share with you. But I want to start with just a picture of me as a baby, and you'll see in a second that my daughter is a little spitting image clone of me. I've always had an interesting perspective into race, diversity, equity, and inclusion because of how I've appeared, right? I am 100% African American male, but my skin did not get the memo, and I got like zero melanin. So my entire life, I've always taken a different look and approach to conversations of race, diversity, and equity. And that's invited me into spaces to have both the perspective of what the lived experience is like for a lot of people in the country, but then to be able to exist in other spaces that I've been very comfortable and been able to kind of create bridges for conversation. So hopefully today, the combination of that lived experience can help you, because it is my goal to continue to help facilitate a world where my children, when they grow up, don't have some of the same concerns, fears, and issues that people have today that I've wholeheartedly believe they shouldn't have. So, my lived experience helps fuel my inspiration to get us going. The main rule for today, not just with my presentation, but for with everything else you hear, is to ask yourself the question of how you can get into action. What are the things that you can do to leverage the privilege or knowledge that you've already got, to use your platforms intentionally, and to put the work out there yourself, to actually go do it, to influence minds, hearts, and actions of your community. The powerful part of realtor associations is how we are able to not just communicate to our members, but to communicate to politicians to get things done and make it happen. Fair housing has been an important kind of federal benchmark law, and there's different things at every state level, but there is a time right now that we're living in where some of the stalwart fair housing institutions and fair housing structures are being challenged, right? Not going to sugarcoat it. It's a very real truth that is causing a lot of concern nationwide. But I wholeheartedly believe that the people who are on the ground at the local and state level can have a huge impact on fair housing, equity, and access, right? You hopefully know that and understand it. And throughout the day today, you're going to get more tools that can let you know how you can leverage the access, privilege, and relationships you've already got to make a difference, right? It can happen. I've seen it happen, and I want to give you some more inspiration to do it. But please learn today. I'm grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that you are plugged in and connecting, but you need to think of an action plan and what you are going to actually do with the information that you get when you leave today. Because action is direct, it is passionate, and it is ongoing. You have to have all of those three things if you want to have a successful business and if you want to continue to give back and support people who need it most. So where are we today in 2025? I think there's a pendulum that swung. If we can remember back to 2020, which while it was 5 years ago, feels like it could have been 25 or 30 years ago at this point, we had a really interesting pendulum swing in this country where more people were cognizant of, talking about, and thinking about these concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, these concepts of fairness, and how our country, how the United States of America had some pretty significant systemic issues with keeping people out, right? A them and an us narrative. And what we witnessed was a really intense swing for that pendulum back to the side of justice, right? Saying that we've recognized, we acknowledge that something was not right, something is not going right. So we're going to do something about it intentionally. We're going to make a change. And some of those changes were significant and helpful, but some of those changes were performative. And as I look at where we are in 2025, when we're now getting a different energy and a different type of focus and a different type of consideration for this concept of liberty versus justice, where that pendulum is now swinging back into the side of liberty. I think we are going to see and we're going to learn that left to the free market, left to just the states, left to just businesses, left to just natural systems and processes, that justice and fairness are going to be impacted negatively by this concept and this pendulum swinging more to the side of liberty. Specifically in the real estate world, specifically where we talk about fair housing, there needs to be a finger put on the scale to offset historic and systemic injustices, period. That's just this fact, right? There are ways people can feel about that fact. And there are folks that, for whatever reason, were offended by that fact and had this concept of kind of a zero-sum game that if others are given an advantage or given support to try to get back to level ground, that that's going to take something away from them. So just know that we're in the midst of pendulum swinging. Know that it can be frustrating, that it can be scary, it can even be upsetting that this pendulum is swinging back towards that side of liberty away from justice. But there is something that you can do about it. You are starting it by being here. It's about acknowledging that this pendulum swing happens. And it's also about acknowledging that these pendulums always do swing back and forth. They ebb and flow just like market cycles do. So you acknowledge where we are in this cycle. And we also understand that there's actions we can and should take to both make a difference and help where it is needed most. I want to inform you and help you with a conversation that I've had to have a lot. I had the good fortune of going to the North Dakota, South Dakota State Convention last fall and giving a 3-hour talk in class on diversity, equity, and inclusion, when you could still say that. And one of the big questions I got from the audience is, well, why are we still talking about this, right? We're in a post-racial society. We're in a time where, you had a black president, you had all these other things that have happened. But there are folks whose lived experience is so far and removed that they really honestly believe that things are completely equal on every front today. And the simple tool and set of toolbox and conversation points I'd like to give you in this conversation when you want to respond to somebody who's asking this question of why are we still talking about fair housing and discrimination today? Said, because humans are still going to err. People are still flawed. People still have a very small scope of both the market and of, quite frankly, the world that they interact with and fully understand. And I think it's our job, if we're going to be helping the community, if we're going to be building a sales business that interacts with and supports a lot of people, to elevate our perspective and think higher. There's an amazing report that NAR Research puts out every year called the Snapshot of Race and Home Buying in America. There's also the profile of home buyers and sellers that everybody on this call should be aware of, using, leveraging, and talking to both consumers and our peers about. But this is a slide that goes through a snapshot from the 2025 report, which talks about 2024 and before data, of homeownership rates and trends by race in America. And simply put, this is why we still are talking about fair housing, equity, access, and discrimination. Because these numbers are not just because the Black, Asian, Hispanic, and other demographic groups don't want to own at a higher level. They were not allowed to in the past. There were historic and systemic systems that prevented them from doing it. So when we talk about fair housing in 2025, it is not a separate conversation. It's not one that exists in a vacuum. And these numbers being so far apart, being so disparate, are a problem. And I see this problem as one that has a business solution that can benefit all of us in the industry. And hopefully today you'll get a little bit of an idea about how you can talk about it in that way for folks that look at this and either deny that it is significant, deny that it matters, and say that, it shouldn't be this way and people just need to bootstrap their way up to overcome that, almost 30-point gap in ownership rate between Black and white households in America. The fact is we're still talking about it because disparities still exist, period. So once we acknowledge that those disparities exist, what do we do about it? There's a great quote from a gentleman named Brian Stevenson that talks about this concept of truth and reconciliation. They are sequential. First, you have to acknowledge and own what that truth is, and then you can move on to the reconciliation and making things better and helping. So as a part of this talk, we start out with some of the ideas of truth and fact about where America is and where people are, specifically with access to housing, the houses that they own today, and just what's going on. Once we acknowledge that truth, then we can talk about strategies for reconciliation. This is where we come in. This is where actions come into place. And this is where things that you should be confident in, because if you lean in and if you look at different opportunities for this concept of reconciliation or additional or expanded access, there's more business opportunity for everybody. And I want that to be the message that people are also leading with, not just guilt or not just frustration or anger about current state of affairs in the past, but an optimistic view of a world where we are actually looking at all the tools and leveraging what is out there to increase access, to increase ownership, and to increase opportunities for all of us as real estate professionals to be able to help more people. So to the truth point, I want to give a couple of slides just about some history and context of kind of where we were as a realtor association and what the impacts of that look like. If you were not aware, the original code of ethics for the National Association of Realtors, its previous association predecessor, said specifically that realtors were not allowed to help communities blend and mix. Realtors were literally prohibited within our code of ethics from encouraging diversity in communities, from allowing the intermingling of different groups, different creeds, different races. So that's the truth of where we were. That's the truth of what this organization did. Now, on the other side of it, and we're looking at where we are in 2025, there is no question that things like redlining, things like blockbusting, things that you learn about in your fair housing class every year still have an impact today in 2025. You can look at maps, you can look at data, you can look at information for who the individuals that owned in areas that were redlined and communities in terms of resources and value today have a direct impact on communities that were redlined in the past. It's a fact in a lot of American cities, right? I encourage you to do research in where you live in Oregon, right? Look up the details on how the historical separation, redlining, and these other racist practices have an impact on today, right? It is just truthful, it is factual, and it is something that we as realtors participated in. If we don't acknowledge that history and we don't acknowledge the truth of where things were, history can repeat itself. And I love this Mark Twain quote explaining that history doesn't always repeat itself, but it often rhymes, right? That there are consistencies that can happen if we are not paying attention to what went down before. One of the most impactful books that I've read as I've been on this journey and talking a lot more about DEI and fair housing concerns is The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And if you have not read that, you definitely need to, especially if you're participating in a conversation about fair housing, because it talks about these historical connections and just the truth of where we were and how it impacts where we are today. So let's talk a little bit about how the social and political climate of today is actually impacting marginalized communities. Because I think as we look at solutions, as we look at actions that we want to take as real estate sales professionals and people in the industry, you have to acknowledge and understand where people are today mentally in order to actually support and help them. I would assume that everybody here has the hope and intention to grow their business and to be able to sell more homes in 2025 and beyond. If that's not your plan or intention, I don't know why you're here showing up, because that's what we all want to do, is have some level of growth and improvement in our kind of career and where we're at. If you know that and you say, I want to help and support different people, I think you need to acknowledge everything that people are bringing to an interaction. For a quick anecdote, my business partners and I are guests on one of our VIP clients' podcasts, a gentleman named Anthony O'Neill. He was a direct understudy of Dave Ramsey, and a lot of people have called him like the millennial Black financial guru. And when we get to go on his show on YouTube a couple times a month, we talk about very simple and straightforward practices that can help people invest in real estate, that can help them just navigate the real estate market. And what I've learned from being on his show for about the last year is the number of folks that reach out to us, that inquire and that are consuming his content, that are, majority young African American, Latino, ethnic. A lot of them are first generation home buyers. A lot of them are newer to wealth, newer to understanding the rules of money and navigating, is that there is so much fear. There's so much fear around doing some of the simple activities that it takes to get into the home buying process, to be credit ready, to be in a position to actually buy their first home or do anything with real estate, because they have not had someone kind of come before them and show them the roadmap. One of my favorite quotes is that one of the most tangible benefits of privilege is being given a roadmap. And what you got to realize is if you want to help a historically marginalized community get into the world that we are in and buy, sell, and invest and be in real estate, you're going to have to understand this a slightly different lens through which that they are looking at all of the prerequisites and things that are required to participate. And it's not that those, prerequisites or the things that we know are needed, like having improved credit scores, understanding debt to income ratios, understanding a lot of these core financial principles are beyond their comprehension. It's not like they don't make sense. It's just that there's a level of both fear and kind of lack of somebody else looking them in their eyes and saying that you have the tools and ability to do this. Here is exactly how. And I honor the extra emotion that you're bringing along with this, right? Some people describe this as generational trauma, right? That there is fear, especially if you're talking to some geriatric millennials like myself. We had parents that were having really difficult times in the most recent financial crisis in 2007 and 2008. If you're trying to get our peers today to take on some of the actions that they saw their family participating in and losing a lot and going through a lot of hardship because they participated in it, you need to just know where people are coming from. So as you look at wanting to help and support and doing what we do at a high level, which is help guide people through that home buying process or investment process, know that there might be some extra baggage that folks are bringing along, and know that it's your job as a real estate salesperson to understand where they're coming from and to be granting grace. It's an interesting concept to weave into a presentation about fair housing, but I think this is a really important space to not go over too fast, is that when you are helping people that are experiencing some type of emotional or psychological challenge, which a lot of communities of color are experiencing in 2025 because of what's happening in the world, you got to grant people a little bit more grace. So know that people are not their worst moment, their worst email, or their worst meeting. Just because they come back at you with fear or some type of elevated emotion, it's our job to receive that and respond with thoughtfulness and with care and with some grace. And I think grace to me looks like you are judging all of the factors of the situation, not necessarily that person. It means you're looking a little bit closer at their whole story and having some tools to be able to communicate effectively and support them through what is a challenging time. We all definitely have blind spots, right? And we have to acknowledge as salespeople that our clients and the people that come to us for help have even more blind spots. I'd argue that if they're a first generation buyer, if there's someone that is coming from a community that doesn't have generations of ownership experience behind them, there's going to be even more blind spots. And those blind spots are going to be emotionally charged. It is your job to help point them out, even if it feels redundant, even if it does feel like you've said that or it should be known or implied. Give a little bit more time and space and grace. If you build some of this into the type of communication you are, navigating and working through with these, different groups and individuals, you're going to not just endear them to you, you're going to earn the right to be working with more of their family and friends and other community, because the way that we make people feel about this process, the way that we make them feel about home ownership and about the opportunity to own and build wealth through real estate is a really significant and high emotional point in the positive when it's done right. But if it's not handled right, from that first phone call to the consult to the time that they're getting under contract, if that's not handled right, you can turn people off. You can ostracize them, or even worst case scenario, you could have someone feel that you're discriminating against them because you're not, treating them and matching their emotion and energy in the right way. So one of the main things I want you to get out of today is, if you're looking to build your business and serve a more diverse clientele base, understand that there may be some different things that people who are different from you bring to an interaction. You need to approach with curiosity, with openness, and with grace, right? Have the tools, and we're going to talk later about some of the tools that I have found really helpful to help salespeople specifically be in a better place to serve new and different communities. Have those tools, lean into them, and admit that even if you're a great salesperson, and if you've done a lot, and if it has been your confidence and all the things that make you awesome at selling real estate, there are probably things about different cultures and different communities that may not be natural or easy or straightforward to you. So you got to have a little bit of humility too, to acknowledge that there are things that you don't know and things that you need to add to your toolbox to better serve everyone. Uh, Next couple things I wanted to talk with us about is that specific role that realtors have in preserving and advancing fair housing. Again, we all have a code of ethics. We yearly have to take both fair housing classes and ethics continuing education requirements. But right now, I think it needs to go a little bit further. And we need to, when we're thinking about serving and protecting fair housing specifically in the communities that need fair housing support, we got to slow down a little bit, right? It is very easy to always just go through your same system, script, talking points, things like that. When you are encountering or when you're, working with more diverse communities, I think it's really important up front to just slow down and take a moment. If we remember the Newsday report from a few years back, one of the most, I'd say, embarrassing examples of kind of egregious fair housing violations, discrimination, and people really just being bad humans to others. One of those main issues that I noticed in watching the report and reading about it was how fast people were trying to go through the process, how fast they were trying to push those potential leads and those testers through the process. But also, when they were going fast, they were being inconsistent with their speed, right? So the first thing I'll say, if we're looking at the different ways that we as realtors can preserve and protect fair housing, it is slowing down a little bit and acknowledging that people come to the home buying process with different needs and different types of support that is necessary to help them accomplish their wants and needs. The other part of it is a simple concept of consistency. What does that mean? That means that if you've got that rental listing, if you've got that, interesting fixer upper at a lower price in a neighborhood, how you respond to every single person that inquires, no matter how they sound over the phone, no matter what the things they're saying to you, no matter the assumptions you are making about them, is consistent. I've had some of the best business opportunities come from some of the most surprising initial interactions. One story I'll share with you is how my team and I do a lot of work with down payment assistance programs in the Washington, D.C. metro area. There's a specific program called HPAP, or the Home Purchase Assistance Program. And this is one of the most challenging from a timeline and execution standpoint programs to navigate in the city. Like, it's really hard. So whenever we have a buyer that is going through that, that buyer normally needs every penny that the system and that program can provide. And that buyer themselves is normally in a either lower income, lower credit, first generation buyer, first time buyer profile. So it's a more challenging system to work through with them. Now, when we help them, when we actually get it done, the joy and the love and the intensity that they will refer us and help us build our business is bigger than any other demographic group that we serve. So it's something we always make space for to take care of with our clients. But the quick story I'll tell is we had a young lady that was going through the HVAC program a few years ago, and she was being blatantly discriminated against by the city. And it was the city that had to give the final underwriting approval to give her money. And one of the final underwriting approval steps was determining household size. She had said in her application affidavit under, risk of perjury and lying that she was only a three-person household, single mom, two kids. The underwriter, for whatever reason, I don't know if they were trying to stalk him on Facebook or something, said, "We don't believe you that this is your household size, so we're going to reject your loan." They couldn't give a specific reason why they didn't believe her. And when I heard this specifically, I used the leverage, I used the position that I've got to go up the food chain to that underwriter supervisor, to the person above them, and explain that whatever their choice for assuming something different about my client, it was false. And that if they didn't get this deal done and over the finish line, we'd have significant issues, including me raising a lot of sand with all of my relationships at our city council, with the mayor's office, everywhere that I know folks. By me advocating for that client, it helped them actually get into their home and get the deal done. Crying tears when she actually was able to close. And it's been a place that she and her children and our family that has grown since have really been able to appreciate and gained a lot of equity. The coolest part of that interaction, and why that was a really challenging thing to get over the finish, is she had an aunt that had another property in the city. And because we put in that extra work and we showed up to help her navigate and get over the finish line with her purchase, her aunt was able to refer another older family home that they needed to sell to us. And it ended up being one of the biggest flip and investment opportunities my partners and I have ever come across, right? So making the choice to show up and support somebody with the resources, with the knowledge that I've got through a challenging program equaled a huge business opportunity on the inside. And I've got tons of stories like that, right? I just want to encourage folks that when you are consistent, when you approach people with that same energy and effort throughout, you will have positive results on the other side. We need to communicate better. As I was saying earlier, when we're looking at the different challenges and the different things that people bring to the home buying process and to everything that goes into buying real estate, we need to elevate our both communication style, cadence, and skill around it. So if you have not done some significant study on communication styles, on being a better communicator, a better negotiator, that's an important thing to add to your toolbox to make sure you're doing better. You have to educate yourself, right? When we're talking about educating ourselves, the most important thing that you're doing is starting with today, but also making sure you're aware of all the programs and systems that are out there for you to leverage and use. This is our job, and it's what we have to do at a high level to make sure we're supporting all of our communities. And the last couple things I'll say is that it is our job to continue to make our world bigger. Absolutely nothing bad happens when you make your world bigger. When I was president for my local, I helped mirror President Charlie Opler's DEI challenge and rolled it out to all of our members and had everybody that was going to be a board member have to go through a separate set of trainings and classes to even qualify to be a board member. And that is now policy, continued policy at our association a few years after I've been gone. There was an example of that, which we can share. Um, as I wrap here, because I see Molly up and I see my starting to get pulled off the screen. When we help more people in real estate, we have the opportunity to make more money, right? So it is important to make sure as you think about increasing access to all types of housing and supporting more communities, that's not something that you're doing solely out of the kindness of your heart. It is a true business opportunity, but if you lead with that heart, the business opportunities are going to follow at a really high level. Molly, I'm going to share these other slides with you to circulate around to everybody, but there are some examples from the profile of home buyers and sellers, as well as the snapshot of race and home buying in America slides that I think really reinforce the business opportunity that exists in serving some marginalized and historically underserved communities. This one is big because it talks about how many people of different ethnic groups still purchased a home through a real estate broker, that still chose to work with realtors. So the evidence is there that all communities need our support. We just have to be ready and available to help and support them. Um, Student debt, understanding how you help people navigate issues like having high student debt loads are extremely significant if you're looking to support and grow within the African American community. And there's tons of tools out here that we can use, man. Use your knowledge, use your relationships, use your networks to put information in one succinct place so it can be better and more easily disseminated. This is an example from that snapshot of race and home buying in America. Later on today, you're going to be connecting with some of these great organizations that can give you some of these communication tools and help you improve your service to communities that might be different from you. And put a little time and effort into organizing down payment assistance and other programs. Again, I'll share this with you, but this is an example of what my team does to put in one place in one succinct package all of the money that's out there to help people because nobody else is really doing it. So this is a business opportunity and growth, but it also can help serve all your communities at a high level. We've got examples on our team YouTube page of an event we do called OwnerCon that helps first-time buyers that want to move up to investment leverage some of the knowledge and resources that we've got to invest in real estate and truly build wealth through it, because that's a really big talking point and a really big attractive concept for a lot of communities of color. You got to help people find money, right? Like that's really impactful. And one of the biggest issues that communities of color have today in navigating the market, it's getting access to capital, especially in down payment assistance. If you do home buyer seminars, last couple tips, make sure you're incorporating some financial literacy and financial empowerment into it. This is a really impactful way to help close some of the challenges and some of the issues we've got with people that don't have access to housing. It's because they don't understand the rules of money. Understand those financial barriers, bring in other people that can help you talk to and communicate with other folks about it. And know that this is at the core of who we are as realtors. I really love this campaign from a few years back, and I still like to incorporate these graphics that NAR created because even if there are national conversations in other spaces where fair housing, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and those conversations are being quieted some, it is still our choice and still the choice of the majority of the realtors I know to help more people, period. That's really who we are at our core, and that's who we should be out in our communities. I'll finish with a quote, is that the future does not belong to those who resist change. It belongs to those who build bigger tables, open more doors, and choose courage over comfort. So for everybody that's here today, thank you for making that choice to show up. I encourage you to use some of these tools, use what you learned today to continue to choose that courage and to continue to help at a high level. On the other side of it, your business, your world, and your life will grow to unimaginable heights. That's more of my contact information there that you can please use to contact me. And as I said, I'm going to share some of my other slides with Molly to disseminate through the group. But I thank you all so much for having me today, and I hope that you have an amazing rest of your day. And thank you so much, Molly, for having me.
Wow. Thank you, Harrison. You're a boss and inspiration. You gave us so much to think about, and thank you for the encouragement to give people grace and to slow down, and for asking us to reflect on how we can use our privilege. I think those are important questions, and we really appreciate you being here and spending the time with us. Thank you. Next up, we please welcome Alexa Smokler. Alexa represents NAR's positions on fair housing to Congress and federal agencies and leads NAR's ACT initiative, which emphasizes accountability, culture change, and training to advance fair housing in the industry. Welcome, Alexia.
Thank you, Molly. It's great to be with you all today as we commemorate the 57th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act of 1968. I've been asked to give you a 5-minute history presentation. I'm going to see if I can make it even shorter since Harrison already covered some of the history for us and how far we've come. But let me spend a few minutes reminding those, or perhaps some of you might be hearing about this for the first time, about why we needed this law. Why in 1968 the United States Congress decided that the Fair Housing Act was essential. Before passage of this law, housing discrimination was pervasive and severe throughout every aspect of the housing industry. Private actors refused to sell or rent homes to people who could have afforded them just because of their race or their national origin, their religion, their other personal characteristics. And government also enforced these dividing lines. Harrison showed the redlining maps. Maybe some of you have seen these before. But what it really boils down to is that around the time of the Great Depression, when 1 million mortgages defaulted, the federal government made a policy decision. The federal government decided that home ownership was good for America, that it helped stabilize families, communities, and grow our economy. And the federal government decided to invest heavily in home ownership. After the Great Depression, it bought up, or during the Great Depression, it bought up 1 million defaulted loans and invented the fixed rate long-term mortgage. This had not been seen before. This was all to create a sustainable pathway to home ownership for middle class and working class Americans. And that's how the FHA was created. And so these policies and this government investment boosted millions of Americans into home ownership, but the programs were all racially restricted. So that means that all that government investment, all that government energy and effort only really went to a certain group, and other groups were shut out. And it invested in particular neighborhoods while other neighborhoods were shut out. You know, this happened again after World War II when the GIs came back and we had a lot of folks starting new families and there was a severe housing shortage. The federal government once again stepped in and said, we need to provide housing for these returning GIs and their new families. And tens of millions of GIs were able to buy affordable homes whose construction was subsidized by the federal government. And their mortgages were backed by the federal government. But once again, all of these privileges were limited to white folks. And so the veterans of color who had fought for freedom abroad came back home to be treated like second-class citizens. And this is where we saw the beginning sparks of the civil rights movement. It was these World War II veterans who did not want to take this kind of treatment anymore and who wanted to demand the same rights as every other American. And we saw this reach its crescendo in the 1960s with the civil rights movement. And throughout the 60s, as various civil rights laws passed, organizers kept trying to include a housing provision in that bill, but they kept meeting with defeat. In fact, NAR launched a national campaign to defeat the Fair Housing Act. And those efforts were successful for several years until the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in April of 1968. And it was 7 days later that President Lyndon B. Johnson was able to galvanize the Congress and pass the law that we now observe and celebrate today. And in these nearly 6 decades since, our industry has made major strides toward upholding and advancing fair housing principles. We still have a long way to go. The history shows up in our snapshot of race and home buying report that Harrison just mentioned. It shows that, for example, white buyers are twice as likely to be able to rely on the sale of an existing residence to fund their down payment. That is generational home ownership and generational wealth showing up for white folks in a way that it doesn't show up for other groups. And our research team has concluded that in this low inventory, high price, and high interest rate environment, we're seeing our housing market split into those who already own and can afford to upgrade and those who are trying to break in. So we at NAR, and you're going to hear more about this from my colleague Brian Green later on, advocate for policies that will help close these gaps because non-discrimination isn't enough. That means increasing the supply of affordable housing, increasing access to credit, and strong fair housing enforcement. So I'm really excited to hear more about all the actions that Oregon Realtors and their partners are taking to help remedy these past wrongs and to move us into a more equitable future. So as we move into the next panel and as we all confront the reality that we're living in today, I would just remind you what Dr. King reminded us, which is that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.
Thank you so much, Alexia. Really appreciate your time. You're going to be our moderator for our next panel. So please welcome our 4 panelists for the Why Fair Housing Matters panel. Alexia is going to moderate, and joining us, we have Michael Sterner, the Fair Housing Manager of the Civil Rights Division of the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries. We have Ashlyn Rollin-Coons, a research assistant at Kansas State University, Jamie Gatewood, Education and Outreach Assistant Director of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon, and Travis Latham, Staff Attorney at Disability Rights Oregon. This panel discussion will examine why disparities still exist, how housing connects to broader issues like education, employment, health, disability, and generational wealth, and what advocacy looks like in practice. Our panelists will share insights and strategies for advancing equity in housing through policy, community engagement, and everyday actions. Welcome.
Well, thank you all to our panelists. I'm really excited for you to share your information with our members. So let's get right into it. So I just mentioned that we're observing the 57th anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, but the Black-white home ownership gap today is the same as it was back then, 30 percentage points, and gaps exist for other groups too. Why do we still have these disparities? And Michael, I'm going to ask you to jump in first and then invite anyone else who wants to jump in.
All right, good morning. Thanks so much for having me. Well, let's see, I think in my experience, a lot of these, the fair housing investigations that we do at the Bureau of Labor and Industries arise from individual personal interactions. And unfortunately, although it's been 50 years, these may be people who are only 30 years old who are interacting with each other. And I think a lot of these conflicts arise from those individual encounters, unfortunately. I will say too that the majority of the cases that we see at the state level are related to rental housing. We really see very few that are coming from purchases or financing. I think it's not that those are free of discrimination, but people may not feel comfortable coming to us. They may not be familiar with their rights in that context. So that may explain some of that, and I think probably my colleagues at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon can speak to that a little bit more through their involvement with HUD. Let's see. I think an issue where I'm seeing a lot of potential concern is with families and individuals who do not have Social Security numbers because of their immigration status, and therefore can't easily access financing for purchase of a home. And as you said, in the past, people, even though they had the money to buy a home or at least make a down payment, were denied because of discriminatory treatment. When you can't access a mortgage, most people do not have the ability to purchase a home, especially a first home. So I think for those individuals that do have an ITIN, they don't have easy access to financing, that's a concern. From our standpoint, we can look into that on the basis of race and national origin, potentially. Those are certainly tied together with immigration status quite often. But I'll leave it to the other panelists to respond at this point. Thanks.
Jamie, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you all kind of hit it on the nose when you're talking about the history of the discriminatory laws and racist practices that were just really prevalent throughout our history and within the home buying process. And I hear a lot of folks are like, oh, it's 57 years ago, but that wasn't that long ago. That was when our grandparents or my grandparents were buying housing. And so now, down the line, that significantly impacts who has gained wealth, right? That's how we gain wealth in this country, is through home ownership and through building equity. And for the most part anyway, like that's the way to do it. And if folks were blocked from that, then it really impacts who has money for those down payments now, who has credit debt now because they didn't have access to that generational wealth, who has loans, for school and all kinds of things. And so I think that's like, when you're talking about the gap in home ownership, that's what it is. It's those laws that existed have really long lasting impacts that are affecting us today, or affecting people of color, Black and Brown people in this country. And then, there's a myriad of other things. I would say, like, something that we learned a couple years ago, we did some listening sessions with potential home buyers and folks who had experienced discrimination in the home buying process. And language barriers was a really big one that came up. And that the system is just not designed to assist people who speak languages other than English. So along with that, potential like lack of having the Social Security number or other information that's going to help you get through that financing process because of the way the system is set up, just being able to read the paperwork. The paperwork is like reading another language if you're not in the real estate market. I've been through it myself. It's very intimidating. And I can't imagine trying to go through that when you don't have access to an interpreter, or if your interpreter, for example, is maybe a child who, an adult child even, but someone who's not familiar with the real estate process. It can be really hard to, I think some of that information can get lost in translation if you don't understand all the procedures and the policies and the information that you're reading. And that was something that came up a lot in our listening sessions that were statewide with home buyers. I'd also say that there's like some other issues that are coming up are like land use issues, like we don't segregate communities by race, on purpose anymore, but I think that it happens because the land use system and the way that we're zoning, and it can really block people off to community resources. That's just one other thing.
Thank you. Do our other panelists want to add anything here, or we can move into the next question?
I think the only other thing I was going to add is that there's been a lot of research about the sentiment around homeownership, and especially people who aren't homeowners and younger generations, they're kind of becoming disillusioned with this idea of the American dream, which homeownership has always been such a big part of. So not only are we up against all this historical discrimination, we're up against the challenges in the housing market right now. Now we're up against people who are kind of just feeling like they're giving up on maybe even becoming a homeowner, but even just finding quality housing. So I think that is possible that it's going to perpetuate these housing disparities as we start to examine that longitudinal data. So that was one other thing I wanted to add.
Thank you for those insights. So even if everybody stopped discriminating today, which we're a long way off from that, but we'd still have these gaps. So I'm wondering, these disparities, they become self-perpetuating. So nobody needs to be actively discriminating anymore because it's just built into the systems and structures and the way we do business. So I'm wondering if any of you want to comment on what systems perpetuate these inequities and what changes can we make to systems in order to get more people into homeownership, particularly those younger folks, Ashlyn?
I can start here. I can't speak to younger folks as much, but speaking as someone that represents the disability community, um, similar to other communities that face disparities in home ownership, there is lack of finances and sometimes explicit bias against people with disabilities. However, one of the other possibly more unique challenges is accessibility, whether that's the technology that's being used. If people with disabilities might have limited forms of communication, they might have not be able to use the telephone as easily or communicate by email. They may have difficulties navigating paperwork, whether it's physical or whether it's electronic. They might also have other impairments such that they might need, for example, like an ASL interpreter. There are also difficulties in terms of accessibility in the sense of the actual housing itself. A lot of folks, especially those with physical impairments, are going to have like immediate barriers that will prevent them from considering certain types of housing. I'll also mention that people with invisible disabilities can face those barriers as well. Someone who is neurodivergent and struggles with sensitivity to noise or lights, or is going to be limited in the kind of place where they can live. So all of those things are factors that can affect that community. And something to, the thing is, a lot of those things I believe could be addressed on the sides of the realtor agent. Are there conversations about how accessible the tools that you're using? Are you flexible in the ways that you can communicate? If you are aware that a person has a disability, are you being thoughtful of the kind of listings that you're providing to them? So just some things to keep in mind.
We always appreciate those tangible takeaways, Travis. Thank you for those tips. Does anyone else want to comment on systemic inequities that are perpetuating some of these disparities that we see? I know, for example, in Washington, we work on advancing alternative credit scoring because we know that current credit scoring systems don't capture some of people's biggest expenses, like paying the rent and utilities on time, which would really more accurately reflect their ability to pay back a mortgage. But without, applying that fair housing lens to this system, we might just let it keep going. But we have seen some of the credit bureaus now beginning to update their credit scoring models so that more people can be included. Anyone else? Ashlyn?
Yeah, I think there were a lot of really creative and unique ways. I think there's just this barrier to affordability that Travis was talking about that's so impactful right now, especially for people that aren't homeowners. And there's been all these creative solutions, like people have proposed bringing back the first-time homebuyer tax credit, and their research has been shown that that's a really net positive to society. And then that you could even create these tax advantaged accounts, kind of like a 529 college account where people could save for a down payment and actually have a huge tax advantage on that. And there just hasn't been a lot of forward motion, especially in the past, year or so, to try to make some of these things realities. So there are a lot of creative solutions out there to address that affordability issue. Like California also with zoning, we got rid of single family zoning, and we just don't have the research to see what kind of impact that's going to have on homeownership, on development, on building. And so we kind of need that research. We need to see if that's effective, if that's a solution we can implement. So I'm kind of going off tangent here, but I think there's a lot of really unique ways to address that affordability issue. And we just need people to advocate for it, and to fund it too.
Well, I think that's exactly on point, and you're going to hear from my colleague Brian Green later, who's probably going to tell you that housing supply is a fair housing issue because, as I mentioned earlier, we're having this bifurcated housing market where people who already own are going to be okay, but people who are trying to get in are confronting these challenges, and those people tend to be disproportionately people of color. So we have some things we're introducing at the federal level that I'm going to let Brian tell you about, but it has to do with incentivizing housing construction through the tax code. But I think the rubber really meets the road at that local level. So I don't know if there's anyone here who's a housing supply guru, but is there anyone here who wants to share any additional insights on local efforts to increase housing supply? Well, I'm going to point you all to NAR's Housing Supply Accelerator Toolkit. This is a new resource that we just created with the American Planning Association and the National League of Cities to give cities and states ideas about how to accelerate their housing supply. All right, let me get back on script. Sorry, folks. So where you live matters. How does housing intersect with issues like education, employment, health outcomes, disability, and generational wealth? Jamie.
Thanks. I would say it intersects with all of those things. When you were talking about, developing more housing, I was like, yes, absolutely. We need more housing. We need more roofs. We need that housing to be deeply affordable, but we also need it to be located in areas with community resources. And I think this is a really important point when we're talking to developers. It can be really difficult because it has to do with the cost of that land and the return on their investment. And then we think, okay, like, where are all of these, what are incentives, right, that we can provide for developers? Some of those can be at a city level, just talking about tax cuts and, system development charges and trying to ease the way for more affordable development to happen. But when I think about the impact on, access to resources, it's everything about where that housing is located. And so if we're building more affordable housing types in, areas of cities that are already disenfranchised, that already have a lack of resources, then in a way we are saying, okay, all the folks who are going to be living in this housing are now going to be, have a lack of resources for the next 100 years, right? As long as that building is going to stand, which can be a really long time. So, trying to get creative with those land use decisions. I love that California has, eliminated single family zoned housing. In Oregon, they've done some work around that, where, for missing middle housing, that you can build that housing on any land that's, zoned for single family zoned land, which is great. But I think we have a lot further to go in that way. And the Department of Conservation and Land Conservation Development, DLCD here in Oregon, have come out with this really great guide that kind of has like a laundry list, a really good list of ways that cities can incentivize the development of more housing. And so I think using some of those creative things, like limiting parking requirements and all kinds of good stuff that can really create more housing and less, parking lots and less barriers and spending less money basically and having more square footage. And putting those kinds of lower affordable housing in areas where we have good schools, great parks, access to good jobs, stores that have healthy food, all of these things are going to make a big difference. Housing is the ultimate stabilizer, right? Like we know this. If you don't have access to safe and stable housing, then the outcomes are proven to be not good, especially for kids. So, yeah.
If
Thanks,
I could add something, I think that we could do a better job integrating environmental justice concepts into fair housing, because access to transportation, living in neighborhoods with higher tree cover tend to be cooler on hot days in the summer. Some good research out of Portland State University about that. These heat islands, those tend to be found in the more affordable parts of the city, which also tend to be farther away from jobs, farther away from childcare. And so the people who can afford those have lower income and are spending more to get around and just to get through the day.
Thanks, Michael. I know we're running short on time. Molly, do we have a moment for everyone to give a final thought?
If it's brief, we do have some questions that are in the chat. So if there's any way we could answer those.
Yeah, I'm seeing all these questions are related to housing supply and development, which I've went a little off script and now I'm not sure if our panel wants to take them on. But maybe we could preserve these questions for later on.
Yeah. Yeah, we do have a period at the end where we've got some question time. And I want to just thank everybody for being here. If you do have a final comment, we'd love to hear it. But I feel like we've got some, the NAR toolkit is great for us to reference. And Jamie, what you mentioned about Oregon and what cities can do. So yeah, if you have a final closing comment, please share.
All right, 30 seconds, folks. Final comment. Let's go around the horn. Jamie?
I would say that a big barrier to development and to fair and affordable housing is community pushback, and we hear about it all the time. So I would really encourage folks to learn about what housing developments are coming up in your area, get educated on why they are so needed, gather allies together, and go to city council meetings, go to town hall meetings, speak out in favor of this development. Oftentimes, we're just hearing about folks who do not want that development, but we really need more voices there that are speaking out because they want it and they know why it's important. So I would just leave you with.
Thanks, Jamie. Ashlyn, how about you?
Yeah,
oh, I'm sorry, Travis, and then Michael. All right, I'll shut up.
No, I'm sorry. I think the only thing I was going to say is that we didn't really get to talk about intergenerational wealth transfers that much, but that's a big factor at play. And it maybe sounds cheesy, but like research has shown over and over again that education is so crucial, just in a general sense of helping people, go to college, become more educated in general, and then really strategic efforts to educate them and improve their mortgage literacy, kind of all the things we've been talking about. So that's one way we can really combat that issue. I'm sure you guys will talk about it more, but that's the only other thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, my favorite advice that I give everyone. I knew someone with very severe mental health disorder involved in the criminal system, and eventually turned his life around and made some really amazing changes. And when asked, like, how did you make the change? He always says, second thought first. And what he means by that is, if you're about to say something, pick that thought, set it aside, and then when you have the second thought, that's the one that you say. And I think when you're working with people who are marginalized in any capacity, um, think what you're about to say. Think about how you're going to act with that person. Take a minute to actually think about what their situation is. And I think that's the first step that you can take towards being a good advocate.
Great advice. Michael, final word goes to, oh, and we have Jamie too with one final word. All right. You already
Okay,
went. Final word to Michael.
thanks. Well, I will just say real quick that at Boley, we do offer technical assistance. If ever, as a real estate professional, you have questions about something you've witnessed or something you're about to engage in, and we would always prefer to avoid any allegations of discrimination in the first place before they happen. Please feel free to reach out to us. It's separate from our investigative function.
Right.
You.
That,
Oh,
that
go
does
ahead.
remind me, that's something I should say. If you are a realtor and you have a disability, you can also reach out to Disability Rights Oregon if you need assistance with accommodations at work or whatever you're up to.
Fantastic. I feel like this is just such a little itty bitty tip of the iceberg. I appreciate everybody's time in sharing just this wealth of knowledge. So we've got a lot of tools of where we can learn more and we can all do better. I want to thank all of you. Thank you, Alexia, Michael, Ashlyn, Jamie, and Travis for your time today. We're going to take a 5-minute break. So stretch your legs and hydrate, and we'll be back at 10:15. Welcome back. Next up, we have Brian Green with a presentation on NAR's fair housing advocacy in Washington. Brian Green is Vice President of Policy Advocacy at the National Association of REALTORS, where he oversees all legislative and regulatory advocacy on behalf of the association's 1.4 million members. Brian joined NAR in November 2019 and spent his first year at NAR raising the association's profile in Washington and nationwide on all fair housing related policy matters as NAR's first director of fair housing policy. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you, Molly. And it's great to be with you all. Great to join Oregon Realtors here today. Let me just say first, that while I am our vice president for policy advocacy, overseeing something like 18 different issue areas, I want to underscore that the fair housing work underlies it all. And the issues of fair housing flow to everything that we do. And I'll also say that as the National Association of Realtors, this issue of fair housing is sort of our Achilles heel. That for us to stand tall in this industry, we have to continue to reinforce our fair housing values and commitment. And this is in part because of that history that you heard about earlier, where we opposed the Fair Housing Act and the impact of that and how it has contributed to the segregation of America and to the wealth inequalities that lack of full participation in the housing market has meant for decades, if not centuries. So we have to continue to stand strong on these issues. And I'll say here in Washington that in our communications with the incoming administration, this was a very important statement from us when we began meeting with the Trump administration, that of all the that among all the issues that we are dealing with in housing, that we are strong proponents of fair housing and how obviously integral it is to the work that we do. And that being said, you know, affordability is a key part of this, and I want to talk some about that too. But when, you know, the new HUD secretary came on board, this was part of our statement to him that we have to ensure continued affordability for first-time homeowners, whom all of you know are disproportionately people of color, and that fair housing is a central ideal. I think everyone knows that at the very beginning of the administration, there were a number of executive orders and those that gave pause to many advocates of civil rights. So, for example, there were the DEI mandates, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I think it's understandable that the first question for housers is, well, how does that affect fair housing? Because DEI does not explicitly refer to fair housing. And often in the public discourse, when people talk about DEI, they aren't talking specifically about the Federal Fair Housing Act. And I think it's been evident that throughout government, it's been somewhat unclear because DEI is not well defined in the presidential executive orders. And because of the lack of definition, it's created a fair amount of confusion within the government. And then it's also had some impacts. So, for example, while there are no explicit words in that executive order about fair housing is a well-established law. When it came to some of the grants at HUD, there were a number of grants that were discontinued. And while they did not explicitly say they were related to DEI reasons, there was a perception that the DEI focus may have resulted in their termination. And when I say it was unclear, many of these grants were no different from grants that were not terminated. And so there's a perception that these grants may have included certain words, just simply words, that resulted in their termination. But those grant terminations have been challenged in court, and those that litigation's ongoing. And then beyond that, there's an expectation that there will be some pressure in Congress to obtain some clarity around this. Again, because most of the fair housing grants were not terminated, and some apparently and seemingly arbitrarily were. So that DEI executive order, while not directly speaking to fair housing, did have an impact, or may have had an impact, on some fair housing grants. What we do know in terms of the particular White House executive orders and actions is that they have had some other fair housing impacts, which also are limited, but nevertheless areas that are still somewhat dynamic in terms of how they're going to shake out. So, for example, there was a recent disparate impact executive order, which essentially stated that the federal government would be revoking any enforcement of the disparate impact doctrine. For those who do not know what this means, this refers to neutral practices that cannot be justified, neutral practices that have disparate impact on certain groups that cannot be justified by some business justification. So in other words, you're not treating people differently, but it has an impact of hurting one group more than another, and it doesn't appear to have a strong justification behind it. Again, while the federal government may announce that it will not be enforcing those regulations or repealing regulations related to disparate impact, that also is subject to the Administrative Procedures Act. And so even that announcement may either, one, get a challenge, or two, may be a long process of unwinding. But I would also point out that when it comes to housing, there's a Supreme Court decision saying that disparate impact is a valid doctrine to prove violations of the Fair Housing Act. So that doctrine is now enshrined in law as affirmed by the Supreme Court. And so despite the executive order, any person who believes they face discrimination and would use disparate impact to prove that case can still bring that case into U.S. District Court. And so I describe that as a case of limited impact. Likewise, the administration withdrew a proposed rule by the Biden administration on affirmatively furthering fair housing. And again, while that got a lot of press coverage and may seem of great moment, the Biden administration over 4 years did not have an affirmatively furthering fair housing rule in place. It took until the 4th year to issue that proposed rule, and that proposed rule never became final. In fact, the previous Trump administration had undone the Obama affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. So we've really had about 8 years where we have not had a formal rule there. And that rule is essentially calling on recipients of federal financial assistance to ensure non-discrimination in their execution of duties. So if you're, say, a city in Oregon and you get community development block grant funds, it put an obligation on you to make sure that you are affirmatively furthering fair housing in what you do, like looking at patterns of segregation, looking at impacts on development on different groups. And so even without that regulation there, the Fair Housing Act imposes that requirement on states and localities who get federal financial assistance. The rule helps clarify that, but we've been operating without a rule for over 8 years. And so we knew that this administration would take this action. It has, but again, hasn't directly affected the state of play since we have not had a rule there for something like 8 years. Probably of more significant impact, just recently, the Department of Justice announced that it was updating its mission statements for different areas of the Civil Rights Division. And the Housing and Civil Enforcement section has put out a new mission statement, which really is shifting its focus to the zoning and land use considerations of religious institutions, and does not explicitly talk about the Fair Housing Act as it historically had. So that may be significant. Again, a very new development. Once again, this is laying out where the federal government's going to place its emphasis, but does not in any way affect what cases private litigants could bring into court. The laws remain the laws. The laws remain strong. But it does mean that the federal focus on these issues is definitely not the priority that we've seen in prior administrations. So what does this mean for all of us? Well, for one, it means that there are potentially other strategic ways to, one, recommit the federal engagement on this. So, we do have 3 branches of government. There is, and historically, there has been a bipartisan commitment to a range of these things, like the fair housing grants, as well as strong Department of Justice enforcement of the fair housing laws. So there is, of course, that potential check. But it also means that it becomes increasingly more important that states lean in on these issues, and that we see more private actors engaging in this space. But I also want to stress that when it comes to fair housing today, one of the biggest issues really is how the lack of housing supply and the lack of affordability is perpetuating wealth inequality. You heard Alexia Smokler of NAR say earlier today that even if we had no discrimination in this country today, because of the history of discrimination which was laid out, we would still have great disparities. And we have to find structural ways to address those great disparities. So we at the Realtors need to continue to emphasize the efforts that we must undertake as a country to create more housing opportunity for first-time homebuyers who are disproportionately people of color. We know that the first-time home buying rate is the lowest it's ever been, and the age of first-time home buyers, the median age, is the highest it's ever been. And this is mostly attributable to supply, which has affected affordability, but then there's also other aspects of affordability that we need to lean in on more. So we continue to emphasize at the federal level that we need a federal investment in housing supply. And this is a great opportunity for us to see that we have more housing supply that will benefit the broader range of the population. This book here, I don't know if you can see it here with there we go, 15 cents on the dollar, was featured in NAR's Fair Housing Month ceremony earlier this year, where we emphasized that this is the gap between the wealth gap between Black homeowners, or rather the Black population and the white population, that Blacks have 15 cents on the dollar compared to whites. And that is largely attributable to housing inequity, and that gap can potentially get greater because of the lack of housing supply and the lack of affordability. So as we think about fair housing, we need to make sure that there is no exacerbation of this wealth issue, so that people can actually be in the market to look for housing, that there's actually housing for people to purchase. And then, of course, we have to enforce the laws to make sure that when they are purchasing housing, there is no unfair discrimination. So
I'm sorry to jump in, Brian.
Yeah.
We are needing to move forward. So if you have a final closing statement, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so going forward, to be as most impactful as we can, we have to continue to address the housing supply and affordability constraints. And then we also have to identify the strategic checks and balances that we can engage in to make sure that the federal enforcement of our fair housing laws are as effective as they can be. And we need to reiterate the power that states and localities have in all these spaces to provide more opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you,
time
Molly.
and your information. We appreciate the important work you do, and thank you for sharing it with us. We're definitely getting a lot of things in our toolkit that we need to work on. So thank you.
Thanks.
Our next panel is called What is a Violation? And it will be moderated by Jeff Wyron. Joining us, we have Ibrahim Coulibaly, Senior Civil Rights Investigator of the Oregon Bureau of Labor and Industries, Eli Kataura, Regulation Division Manager of the Oregon Real Estate Agency, and Travis Latham, again, thank you, Staff Attorney at Disability Rights Oregon. In this session, our panelists will focus on the practical side of fair housing, what realtors need to know to stay compliant, avoid common pitfalls, and actively uphold the law in their daily work. We'll cover everything from marketing do's and don'ts to disability accommodations, reporting violations, and how Oregon laws may go beyond federal standards. That's a lot to say that we're going to cover, so we're going to do our best. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, Molly. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to all of the panelists. We have a lot of questions, and we have a very short amount of time, so I'm going to just allow any participants to read your resume, read your bios online, and I think Molly has introduced us. So with your permission, I'm just going to jump right into the questions, if that's all right with you guys. Awesome. So the first question is, what are the most common violations of fair housing law? And Ibrahim, I'm going to ask you to kick us off with that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. The most common violation that we see at BOLI, the Bureau of Labor and Industries, is disability-related violations, reasonable accommodation denial, or charging more for the deposit for people with disability, or even refusing to rent to people with disability. And then we also have the race-related discrimination. And the third group, I would say, is family status. And those are the three main common discrimination, housing-related, that we see at BOLI.
Specifically on the family status, do you find people discriminating against being willing to provide housing for families with children, without children? What are you seeing in regard to those types of violations?
Yeah, it's essentially about discrimination against families with children, because you have a lot of apartment complex, or sometimes they will express concern about kids making noise, running, and other people not wanting kids around, not wanting noise. They will try to assign all the families around a certain corner of the property where they would sometimes pretend that's because it's closer to the park. So they don't give the choice to the families to determine where they want to stay. They will say, okay, we have like a family-friendly area here where we have all the families, and your kids can play with other kids. But that's a discrimination, because we have to be able to decide where we want to live, regardless of if we have kids or not.
Got it. Thank you. The next question I'm going to ask for you, Travis, is what are some important things that realtors need to know about fair housing laws, particularly in regard to clients with disabilities? So I think it dovetails right into the last question that Ibrahim answered.
Yeah, so let me talk a little bit about reasonable accommodations. So under the Fair Housing Act and under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, um, uh, certain people are supposed to provide reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. In the case for realtors, realtor agents do need to provide reasonable accommodations for their clients. So if you have a client who has a disability and they request a reasonable accommodation for that, there's kind of a two-step dance that you need to do. Number one, when a person makes a request, you need to assess whether or not that request is reasonable. If a request is what we call an undue hardship, and if it's prohibitively expensive, if it's something that would be like infeasible to do, you're not required to implement it. But if it is something that is reasonable, even if it's a little bit of a hassle, then legally you're required to approve the accommodation. Step number two is if something is prohibitively expensive, unfeasible, you still have to have a good faith conversation to see if there's an alternative accommodation that you could approve. So just kind of putting that all in context, if you have if you're working with someone with a disability and they request to take their service animal on tours of houses with them. In most cases, that would be considered a reasonable accommodation. It might be a little bit of a hassle, but it's not going to be prohibitively expensive. It's not going to cause any major issues. And there's not a cookie cutter for every accommodation. Every person is different. Every disability is different. The other thing I would mention for realtors to know is that I don't, these are the words I don't know. The person selling the house,
Seller.
the seller is required to provide reasonable accommodations as well because they are offering their space to the public to come and tour and to consider buying. And so if someone requests reasonable accommodations from a seller, they're also required to provide them. I use the example of a service animal all the time, but it could be I need your materials in a larger print, or because of my disability, I can't do a tour in the morning. Can I do the tour in the afternoon? And just as an example of something that might be unfeasible, it could be say, will you install a wheelchair ramp so that I can tour your house?
Right.
It's probably not feasible. But maybe there's some other accommodation that could be in place to help someone with a mobility issue. So anyways, always good to have that conversation. You're not required to drill people and ask them what their accommodation needs are. Usually you can wait until the person actually asks for it. That being said, if you can visibly see that somebody has a disability, be sensitive, but ask if there's anything that you could do to help them through the process.
I think that's great. And I like the service animal example because as a principal broker, that's the point of conflict that I see most commonly is somebody wants to bring a service animal through. The seller didn't realize that they were bringing a service animal through. They don't know it's a service animal. They just see on their Ring doorbell that somebody came to the showing and brought their dog in and they're upset. So, I would add to what you said that communication is key here. If you have a situation where somebody needs to bring a service animal with them, engage with the seller. Let them know that's happening. Let them know what their obligations are regarding fair housing. And I think that that'll avoid a lot of the conflict that we do see. And it's not a ton, but it does happen. So that's a great example. Thank you, Travis.
Mhm.
Ollie, I'm going to come to you with the third question, which is, what are some tips to avoid a fair housing violation in marketing and listing descriptions? Are there any key words to avoid or include?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as far as the real estate agency goes and the statutory authority that we have, our broker regulation around advertising doesn't mention fair housing specifically. But what I would say is understand who the protected classes are and understand that with the only exception I can think of is there are communities where age does pose a restriction, 55 and over communities, that kind of thing. But just understand that the real estate agency's regulation primarily talks about the responsibilities of you to be educated. It's in our continuing education rules. And that if we notice that there is something about a complaint provided to our agency that might be a fair housing issue, we're going to cross-report that. So our obligation is to let the authorities who do regulate that know. I know that doesn't really answer your question other than to say understand which classes are protected and just know that you can be regulated, but it may not be by our agency.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that education is key. There's a huge fair housing component to Article 10 in the Realtor Code of Ethics. We talk about that when we teach Code of Ethics. And I think something that's relevant for agents to understand is it is as much about stating an exclusion, right? Saying, hey, this property doesn't work for this type of person. If that's a protected class, that's obviously a violation. But it also in the Code of Ethics says you can't state a preference for anybody who's not in, a protected class or whatever. You can't discriminate against somebody that's in a protected class by stating this property is great for this group of people, and that implies that it's not great for somebody who might be in a protected class. And the next question is, who reports a fair housing violation? I think I see realtors reporting that. I see the public reporting that. Obviously, I think the most common people who will report it are the people who are most dramatically affected by it. So if somebody does have a disability or is in a protected class and feels like they're being discriminated against, they or their realtor are likely going to be the people reporting that. Is that what you see, Ibrahim?
Yes. Most of the time, the people who are at the receiving end of the discrimination are the one more likely to report it to bully if they know their rights. So I would encourage the realtors to always educate people you engage with about their rights, about the agencies here in Oregon or HUD that enforce the Fair Housing Act, because sometimes people just don't know that Bolly has a fair housing enforcement unit. And my manager, who was part of the prior panel, Michael, is doing a lot of work to educate people, to raise awareness about our unit. The commissioner also is doing that. There are 7 of us, and we are all on this call here: Nabil, Antonio, Lima, Lisa, and Crystal are all on this call. We are available to meet you where you are all throughout Oregon. We travel, we meet with people, we discuss, and we want people to know that they can call, they can file a complaint online, because we have a portal for that, and we will investigate. We not only we investigate the Fair Housing Act, but in Oregon, in addition to that, we also have a source of income as being something that you cannot be discriminated against for, and that encompasses people who are on Section 8. And more, we have the gig economy, where we're seeing people who are, doing Bitcoin and those kind of things, and they have it's their full-time job now. They are making money, and we at least I have personally seen a complaint about someone wanting to buy a house and like, okay, now your source of income is not as legit as someone who had a 9 to 5 job. So educate people, report and report. It doesn't matter if you're sure, you don't have to be sure that this is a violation. Just report it and we will take a look at it. If there is no violation, it's an opportunity for us to also educate those people. So please do.
That's great. And I'm going to there's 3 more questions, and I think you've kind of answered them already in the responses you all 3 have given. How vigilant should a realtor be about reporting violations they see in the MLS? Can they do that anonymously? Yes, they can. The MLS itself, when you put in a property description, the MLS is going to red flag that. They have a bunch of mechanisms built in to be looking for potential fair housing violations, and they're going to flag that too. But certainly, if you see it as a realtor, as Ibrahim just said, report it. Absolutely. Even if it's not a violation, it'll be an opportunity for some education. As Ellie already said, the best thing you can do as an agent is be educated. Coming to an event like this helps a lot, but that fair housing that you take as part of your LARC training and as part of your code of ethics training will help as well. And what should a realtor do if they witness or become aware of a potential fair housing violation? You just heard the answer. Report it. And again, if it's not a violation, it'll be an opportunity for education for you or the person who maybe could reword something a little bit differently and certainly probably isn't intending to violate fair housing law. And are there any specific Oregon laws or regulations that realtors need to know in addition to federal fair housing laws? We do have some protected classes above and beyond what the federal government has. You hit one of those, Ibrahim, which is a source of income. Travis or Ellie, are you aware of any others that we should mention really quickly?
I would just say that a person's sex or gender identity is a protected class, and something to keep in mind with that population is that that in itself is not a disability, but a lot of those folks also experience disabilities, and often related to the trauma related to discrimination. So keep that in
Good
mind.
point. Good point. Okay, well, we're at 10:40. So go ahead, Ibrahim.
Yeah, I want to add something here. The domestic violence victim status here in Oregon is also something to pay attention to. And that may happen, you as a realtor, you may be confronted to that when a couple, for example, is wanted to change the list to let someone out of the list because of this situation where this person can no longer be with the person they were on the list with. So be aware of those, and if you are faced with a situation like that and you're not sure what to do, let us know. We will help you navigate that.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate and common reality. Well, I feel like the 4 of us could probably talk for several hours about all of these topics, but I know we have to yield our time back to Molly. I think we've covered a lot of ground in the last 15 minutes. I want to thank the 3 of you for being here. Molly, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, Ibrahim, Ellie, and Travis. It's like a fire hose. We're getting so much information. Love your organizations, and they're definitely something we should keep in our toolbox. So I appreciate your time. Thank you. Please welcome John Miller. He is the Executive Director of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon for a statewide fair housing update. John, if there's any way that you could speed up your presentation, we're running a little behind. If not, that's okay. But if you can, that'd be awesome. Thank you and welcome.
Thanks, Molly. And yeah, I see that we are pretty far behind on time. So I'll try to go really fast. I do have a slideshow, so I'd like to be able to do that, but I'll click through really fast. So I'm going to go ahead and share. And just a moment here. I think I can do it here. Sorry, just one moment. And then I need to do this. And then there we go. Okay. Are we seeing Are you seeing a full screen or are you seeing a broken screen? Please let me know. Do you hear me at all? Interesting. Hello, are you still there? Huh. I'm sorry, I seem to have lost everything here. Are folks able to hear me? Interesting. Okay, well, I can't hear you.
We can hear you. We can see you. I'm just removed while you give your presentation. So we saw yours. Sorry about.
Okay, I apologize. And was my presentation showing?
It was, yes.
So much for being fast. Okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, here we go. Great. Okay, so I am John Miller. I'm the executive director of the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. I'm also a licensed real estate agent. I've been licensed since 2002. I got my license when I was running a nonprofit organization called Host Development. When I was there, we built 300 homes for first-time home buyers. It was a nonprofit. One of our goals was to close the minority homeownership gap. And while I was there, we sold over half of our homes to BIPOC families. I also worked for Housing Oregon for a while, and then Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So really quick, Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So we've been around for 35 years. We do a few different things. We do education and outreach. That's where we do things like today. We actually go into the public. We talk to jurisdictions about fair housing law. We talk to realtors and property managers and others about fair housing law. And then we educate folks when things come up that might be wrong. And that actually leads to our enforcement work. So in our enforcement team, we do a few different things. One, we do intakes. So if you have a fair housing complaint, you can call our hotline or just get in touch with us, and we will do an investigation of your complaint. Sometimes we couple that investigation with testing. So we'll send out secret shoppers, if you will, to test fair housing law and make sure that people are complying. And then if we learn that they're not, we actually can take action, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We also do public policy work at the state legislature and with local jurisdictions. We run a landlord hotline. The number is here on the screen, and you can find that on our website. And realtors are welcome to call this hotline as well if you ever have fair housing questions. So really quick, we've already talked about some of this, so I'm going to zoom through this. Federal protected classes are race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, and familial status. And then we have additional protections in Oregon, which we just spoke about. Domestic violence, victims of domestic violence, marital status, sexual orientation and gender identity, source of income. We also, within state law, we have the affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement, and state law also addresses disparate impact. So what's happening at the federal level? I think several speakers have said, I've already brought this up, but we've had some sort of troubling executive orders recently. One is right now, sexual orientation and gender identity is to not be investigated by HUD. Affirmatively furthering fair housing has been, we don't actually have that mandate at the federal level. And then just last week, they came out and said we can no longer consider disparate impact. And I think previous panelists have already spoken about that, so I'm not going to go into those. So what changes in Oregon because of these changes? Well, in short, nothing, actually. Oregon law supersedes federal law. And so just because the federal government right now is saying, we don't think these are important issues, Oregon law says we do. And so we continue to have to, all the laws in Oregon supersede the federal law. So all those things that the executive orders might have tried to dampen down are still in place here in Oregon. The big difference is that some complaints will no longer be investigated by HUD. So where do you go with complaints? Well, first, you can always come to Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So if one of your clients, if you feel like one of your clients is being discriminated against, or if there's, maybe somebody else's client is being discriminatory, you can always call us. We've got folks that can talk you through what the concern is. We'll sort of discern whether it's an actual fair housing thing or a landlord-tenant law or what it might be. You can also call HUD, but you can't call HUD for sexual orientation and gender identity, affirmatively furthering fair housing or disparate impact concerns. And one thing you may have all heard that the Region 10 office of HUD is maybe closing. So that's a big concern for our state, especially because we're not sure where the HUD support would go. Probably San Francisco would be where all HUD complaints will end up. So we heard that about a month ago and we haven't heard anything about it since. So hopefully that's not going anywhere. And then Bully, you've all heard from Bully a few times today. That's a great place to go where if you've got concerns about fair housing issues. So now let's get to more about what's happening in our state right now. So first of all, I've heard a lot of conversation today about housing supply. So good news, there's actually some housing supply things going through the legislature right now. So this is a place where you can actually get involved and be supportive. First of all, there's one of the bills that we're supporting is Senate Bill 444, and this creates accessible units in new multi-family buildings. And so what this bill will do is if you have a building of over 15 units, 10% of those units have to be accessible for people with disabilities. So that's one that we're supporting. There's also most of the other things are just in the budget requests that end up kind of all coming together at the end of the session. But there is $100.9 million bill for affordable home ownership development, which I think is super exciting. The state has often been pretty quiet about affordable home ownership development, but I think as realtors, we can all really appreciate that budget request. Also, there is a $30 million down payment assistance for first-time homebuyers package that we're backing. And there's also $16.9 million homeownership development incubator program, which will help get more affordable homes built. There's also some other bills around supply. One is a budget request for a $680 million bond to build new affordable rental homes. Also, one of the big challenges often is infrastructure. You might have a piece of land, but there's no infrastructure there. So there's a bill going through right now for a $100 million bond for infrastructure. And lastly, we've got a bunch of affordable housing that might become unaffordable once the restrictions expire. And so we're asking for a $260 million bond to help preserve what we've already got and make sure that the expiring units don't go away. If you want more about this, you can find all this information at the Oregon Housing Alliance. That's basically their agenda, and that's what we are supporting as well, except for SB 444 is on their agenda as well, but it's not specifically called out as a focus. And lastly, some more information about us. You can reach us at fhco.org. Our phone number is on here. We also have a landlord hotline, which I already mentioned. And if you feel there is discrimination, you can call that same number and do extension 2. And there you go. That's my presentation.
You did so great. Thank you, John, for being so adaptable. And it was a great presentation. So I appreciate it. I have been lucky enough to attend a Fair Housing Council education outreach. And it just opened my eyes and was such well-spent time. So I appreciate you for being here today. Thank you so much.
Great. All right. Thank you. All right.
Thanks.
Take care.
So now we're going to take a few minutes to talk about the affinity groups, which we love and need to learn more about. So first up, we have Jordan Lee from ARIA, the Asian Real Estate Association of America. Hi, Jordan.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Just real quick, since there's been a lot of talk about generational wealth, I thought I'd give a quick personal story. I'm half Chinese, half white. My mom's family came here on the Oregon Trail, and my dad's side came here to work on the railroad, or part of it did. But it's just interesting dichotomy, right? in that there was that 10-year period of the Oregon Trail where if you come here, you would get 360 acres if you were married. Well, if you were married and you were white, or like I think the verbiage was a half-breed Native American. And this is basically Native American land, right, that they were just giving to US citizens that were coming across the country. So a portion of my family inherited that, and it's just an interesting dichotomy to see that the other side of my family came here and were working on the railroads. After the railroads were completed, they become coolies, was the term that was called then, but basically indentured servants in households. So just a quick funny story, and you can see, I mean, that's not that far back in my line, right? That my grandpa was Chinese. He came over here when he was 13. He tried to buy a home in Laurelhurst, and he was redlined because he was not a citizen. There was one area that they opened up because it was during the Depression, and so there was kind of sales were struggling in Ladd's Addition, and so Chinese and Filipinos and Italians were all able to purchase in that area in Ladd's, where even though he had the money, he couldn't purchase in Laurelhurst. So that's just a quick little personal story about redlining and how generational wealth can impact families, right? Because, the inheritance from my grandma's side, which essentially came originally from that 360 acres, was something that helped me be able to get into my first home at an early age in time, compared relative to some of my peers when I was making a minimum wage, when I was getting paid minimum wage. So that ARIA, the Asian Real Estate Association of America, we advocate for sustainable homeownership rights. Talking about advocacy, how laws are important. On a national scale, we do a few things. One of those is that we have always advocated for disaggregation of data, as well as just data collecting in general. Asian was not on the census until 2016, and that's something that we advocated through. Money flows through data and census, so that was helpful for us. Now, additionally, we're advocating for disaggregated data, right? Because when you say the word Asian, you think, oh, like Asians are, whatever, this socioeconomic status. When we looked at that home ownership chart earlier, it was Asian, but if you look at different countries of origin, right? Chinese, Indian, typically, Japanese, typically at the top of the income, credit, and wealth charts. But then if there's other Asian groups that are, typically at the bottom, whether it's Micronesian or other groups. So I think, again, there's a lot of disparity there. And so even though we advocate together, there's often a misunderstanding of what it means to be Asian and to be an Asian home buyer. So as a local group, we collect money for down payment assistance grants, and we're hoping to offer 2 down payment assistance grants for first generation home buyers in the Oregon area that are kind of language challenged, and first generational, and obviously limited income. So yeah, if you have any questions about the Asian Real Estate Association and would like to become involved, we're always looking to bring on new members, and in particular new leaders and more diverse groups that can serve different languages. We represented about 10 or 12 languages, but we're always, our local group is always looking to bring on more.
Thank you. Thank you, Jordan, for sharing your personal perspective and your generational history, and for letting us know what ARIA does. We appreciate your time. Thank you. So now we're going to have Whitney Robinson with the Women's Council of Realtors. Hi.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Whitney Robinson, and I am your 2025 president-elect for the Women's Council of Realtors. So thank you guys for having me here today. Just want to give you a short little background of what Women's Council of Realtors is and how it started and why it started, because that's how it ties into what we're all speaking about today. Since 1938, Women's Council of Realtors was the industry's premier source for strong, committed, well-trained business and community leaders. Today, we have over 13,000 members and 250 networks nationwide, which all make up the community and leaders that we have today. For those of you who ask, like, why do we still need this? The answer is pretty clear when you look at the history. We exist because for decades, women were excluded from organized real estate. We didn't let us stop us. And in 1938, 37 determined women created a space where they could thrive. And they built a foundation that now, 80 years later, we are still standing. So we represent the Portland chapter. We have a ton of different networks that we work with. We are working to get our state network back up and running. That is a big thing for us right now. But with the 13,000 members, our average of Women's Council, 15,000 annually comes from just Women's Council of Realtor referrals, which is huge when you look to build your business. And I think I personally have 3 referrals out to different WCR members across the US. So when you look at that, we're bringing community and we trust each other. We're all in this together. And we know that if we refer to someone else, it will make things happen. And it's kind of an ease to everyone else. So if you guys have any questions on membership, we do have a couple upcoming events that I just wanted to mention. On Thursday, actually, we have a Grow With Us event. We are going to make bouquets from a Beverly Hills florist who was a florist to the stars. Is going to help us do that. And then we're also going to do a CE class. We like to add CEs to most of our events to give the educational piece of the background for everyone to be successful as leaders. So we will have a CE class on 1031 exchange. And then in June, we have our mini golf tournament, which was a huge hit last year. So I know that everyone doesn't like to golf, but it is a fun event. It's mini golf. Everyone can participate in mini golf. And it's going to be a fun event. So those are our 2 upcoming events. But if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to chat. For me personally, my business took off when I got more involved in Women's Council. I had a community and I wanted to be a leader and I wanted to showcase that in real estate. And so it's definitely set me up for the future and building my business professionally and personally.
Thank you, Whitney. Thank you for your time sharing about WCR. We really appreciate it. Now we have Percy Wise from the LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance. Hi, Percy.
Hi, everybody. My name is Percy Wise, and I'm an out transgender mortgage broker at Two Rivers Mortgage LLC in Portland. I'm serving clients from all walks of life throughout Oregon, Washington, and California. I'm here today speaking on behalf of the LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance and to encourage you to join us. The mission of our alliance is advocate, elevate, celebrate. Advocate for fair housing for all and promote LGBTQ plus homeownership. Elevate professionalism in the industry through education and networking. Celebrate diversity and inclusion in our members and allied partners. The LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance is a national nonprofit, and we are organized here through a local Oregon chapter. We exist because the LGBTQ plus community suffers from pronounced housing discrimination and housing disparities. In the most recent published survey of the transgender community, only 16% of respondents reported home ownership compared to 64% of the US general population. Similarly, in a comprehensive study, Freddie Mac reported a homeownership rate of only 49% for all LGBTQ respondents, compared with the general 64% homeownership rate. There's one thing you take away today. It is that people who sit at the intersections of race, ethnicity, disabilities, and LGBTQ identities face even far greater disparities when it comes to fair housing. The LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance seeks to address these disparities, foster a healthy business community, and invites membership from people from all areas of real estate practice, realtors, mortgage loan officers, title escrow agents, property managers, etc., as well as all walks of life, whether LGBTQ identified or straight allies. Membership in the Alliance includes a profile listing on the customer and referral directory, lgbtqplushomes.com, member discounts on travel, business services, and client services, the ability to use the Alliance logo on marketing materials, social places to connect, and invitations to all of our local chapter events, such as CEs on topics of fair housing and business development, and our annual Oregon Speed Networking event that matches LGBTQ plus and allied contractors and real estate agents. Our national office engages in advocacy, provides comprehensive reports and research to help your business, and sponsors both an annual conference and a housing policy symposium in Washington, D.C. I encourage you to join us by completing your membership at the LGBTQ Real Estate Alliance website. You're also welcome to reach out to me, Percy Wise, or our local chapter president, Joey Kearns. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Percy. Appreciate all the information about the LGBTQ plus Real Estate Alliance. Next, I would like to welcome Gabby Mann from NAREP, the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals. Hi, Gabby.
Hi, hello everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Gabriela Mann. I'm 2025 president of NAREP, Western Oregon, and I'm very happy to be here. Our mission is to advance sustainable Hispanic homeownership by educating and empowering real estate professionals, advocating for public policies, and facilitating networking opportunities. NAREP believes every individual who desires to become a homeowner and can sustain a mortgage should have access to homeownership. We focus our efforts on housing affordability, access to credit, industry best practices, in which here locally it has become a priority for us to really bring more education to realtors that serve our community. Macroeconomic issues. NAREP is the largest Hispanic association organization in the country with more than 40,000 members. We have more than 200 chapters in the country. Our chapter here locally is a very new chapter. We just became established as a chapter in 2024, so we are growing. We are seeking for your support. What we do here locally and what it takes for us affinity groups to really sustain and keep going is your support. Is you becoming a member, you are helping us to stay alive. We all work in volunteer basis. We don't get paid for what we do every day. And the work we really do for our communities is making a difference. Here locally, our board of directors have been supporting OREF forms to really translate a better quality of Spanish translations in all the forms. So this is very attainable and very today to tell you that we are having and doing an impact in the things that we do every day to improve conditions for our community. In Oregon, the Hispanic community is nearly 16%. However, it's very interesting to see where the numbers are coming and where the growth is happening. Nearly a third of the Gen Z generation is going to be Hispanics. So think about just the power that homeownership will have coming from Hispanic within the next 20 years. 7 out of 10 new homeowners are going to be Hispanics. So we really want to focus and put a lot of effort in educating our community, educating realtors, providing better service, and doing the right things for the right reasons. So I really, again, seeking for your support to join all these affinity groups and things that, in the long term, by working together, by working and facilitating things for these groups, we are improving conditions for our buyers. And hopefully we can see more affordability and easier way to get into homes for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. And thank you for all your hard work in spreading the mission of NAREP. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We would please welcome Gabby Mann from NAREP, the National NAREB, the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. Hi, Deborah. Thank you.
Hi. I'm Deborah Neal, and I'm the Vice President of NARAB, which is the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, a network of Black real estate professions. We were established in 1947, the National, and it was out of necessity because of what was mentioned a little bit earlier today regarding the GI Bill and just the lack of support and representation for Black Americans that wanted to become homeownerships. So since that time, actually, NARAB had a huge part in the fair housing signing of 57 years ago, April 11th, 1968. And so since then, they have been constantly backing and advocating for fair housing for African Americans. And NARAB has their 5 pillars of strategic priorities are faith-based community engagement, women in real estate, diversity, equity, and inclusion in small businesses, multi-generational wealth, government and policies. And these are a lot of the issues that and challenges that NARAB advocates for individuals of color. Here in our local office in Portland, we have been, since I believe what Gabby said, since 2024 here in Portland. So we are welcoming anyone who would like to be a part of what we do, why we do what we do, which is advocating again for fair housing and advocating for the underserved individuals that their desire to become homeowners, we can take them through the necessary steps. One of the things that we emphasize here is really education. And like it was mentioned earlier, there are a lot of nonprofit organizations that we partner with to help individuals see that there is that hope down the line of becoming homeowners that is available. So we advocate very strongly for those individuals. The other thing I wanted to say, part of some of our successes that we've had, last year we held a homeowners resource forum, and we were actually able to not give away, but provide a $40,000 down payment assistance program, which one person did receive that, went through the proper education that they needed to, went through the credit and everything, and they actually achieved their first home. I was not the selling realtor. It was one of our other NARAB members, but I was able to go to their keys the day that they got their keys and take picture. And I tell you, being a part of an organization that we can advocate and help people achieve their dream is the reward. It goes beyond yes, we are compensated, but the reward is actually really helping people. So with that being said, I want to welcome anyone who wants to be a part of the NARAB organization. We accept anyone. We're not exclusive. We're inclusive. And we have a homeowners forum coming up again in July. I'd like to, if you're interested in being a part of what we do, please give me a call. Please email me. We would love to have you. And I'd love to actually maybe answer more questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Deborah, and thank you for sharing the win of NARAB. I appreciate your message that we can all join all the affinity groups to support each other and just become better realtors. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. We have Leslie Frazier, and she's going to be giving us a session about implementing fair housing through purposeful DEI. Leslie Frazier is the Senior Vice President of Community and Industry Relations at Virginia Realtors. Her responsibilities include partnering with various housing and real estate related organizations in Virginia, being her association's primary liaison with NAR and leading the organization's diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Molly. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon from the East Coast. Again, I'm Leslie Frazier from Virginia Realtors. Very excited to be here with you all as we near the end of Fair Housing Month, and excited to talk about how implementing fair housing through purposeful diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important. The future of fair housing is really at a critical point right now. We're all navigating the complex and challenging DEI climate we're currently in. I think societies worldwide are grappling with systemic inequities and striving to create more inclusive communities. And I believe the housing sector is in a position to be a key arena for transformative change. The principles of fair housing, rooted in the elimination of discrimination and promoting equal opportunity, are constantly being tested by socio-political dynamics and economic pressures. So to set the stage, DEI initiatives and integrating them into housing policies and practices isn't only essential for addressing historical injustices, but also for creating more sustainable housing and that landscape that we really need in the country. So don't have long with you, but we're going to go over a few things today. Just when I think everyone kind of understands what we mean when we say DEI, I learn more and more that a lot of people really don't. So for the purpose of our conversation today, I'm going to explain what I mean by diversity, equity, and inclusion. A little bit of a recap on historical inequities, especially the role that realtors have played. We'll talk about DEI and fair housing, how they're related. I actually like to say they're cousins because they're very similar concepts, but not the same thing. And then once we do that, we'll talk through some ways to be purposeful about DEI. So first, let's look at this picture. These represent a lot of different elements of diversity, though there are many more not pictured. I think we often think about diversity in terms of race, and that's certainly a factor, but it really is a whole host of things, from someone's own lived experiences, their religion, their different skill sets they have. But for inclusion to happen, you really want to put the pieces of the puzzle together. But this quote from Verna Myers is one of my favorite ways to talk about diversity and inclusion. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. It kind of reminds me of high school prom. If you went and you were a wallflower, you were there, you were at your dance, but you probably had a very different experience versus if someone invited you out on the dance floor and you danced the night away. You probably went home and told your folks it was the best time of your life. So people who are proponents of diversity and inclusion really want to be invited to the party and asked to dance. But the E stands for equity. And I think a lot of times people get equity and equality confused. Equality is the image on the left. It's giving everyone the same thing, which sounds fair in theory, but it really only works if everyone is at the same place to begin with or has the same abilities. And as you can see from this photo, people in the picture have different heights, different abilities, so giving them all the same size box does not allow them to all see the game. Whereas equity on the right is giving everyone access to the same opportunities. So it doesn't matter where you start, doesn't matter your height or your ability, everyone is now able to see the game. A little bit of recap on historical inequities. I know during COVID, we talked so much about history and suggested that everyone and their mom read The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. But it really is so important to understand what happened in the past as it shapes our present and future. Think about it. The Fair Housing Act was created at a time in our history where we were fighting against division, fighting for civil rights and for equal opportunity, which sadly sounds very familiar because we're still doing a lot of that today. But if you haven't read The Color of Law or checked it out, I really suggest it. Even though the Fair Housing Act made redlining illegal, the impact of segregating those neighborhoods and intentionally denying loans to Black and Brown communities remains today. I actually live in a neighborhood that would have been marked red on a map. And even though it's changing a lot and developing tremendously, you can still see a lot of the remains of the decades of neglect and lack of investment today. A lot of the long-term residents in my neighborhood have a lack of education, they have poor physical health, and some have mental health and substance abuse challenges. But all of this is connected, as housing is a key social determinant of health. And in The Color of Law, Richard Rothstein argues that the government put policies like redlining and blockbusting in place, so the government should fix them. And while I agree governments play key roles, there's so many more parties that need to come to the table. I mean, look at our own industry and our own history. The former Realtor Code of Ethics excerpt here on the screen, that kind of practice was embedded not only in our ethical code, but in the way we did real estate for decades. And it wasn't fully repealed, this language, until the 70s. NAR issued an apology a couple of years ago and is still continuing to work on ways to right past wrongs. But we really have to come together and work on this at all levels of the Realtor Association, not just at NAR, to really make true change. So how are DEI and fair housing related? As I mentioned earlier, I like to call them cousins. Fair housing is the law. It's a solid infrastructure, but sadly, people often break the law, especially if they really don't understand the underlying causes behind it. Whereas DEI is more about the individual and their journey to understanding differences and how different backgrounds and lived experiences shape how people view and encounter the world. So if the Fair Housing Act has been in place 57 years, well, why do we still have violations today? I would argue it's because people don't understand DEI. They're not far along enough in their individual journey of understanding differences and recognizing their own biases and how systemic and their individual biases really influence behavior. So we have to all work on this in order to foster inclusive environments and tackle a lot of the systemic barriers to housing. So you see, DEI and fair housing are cousins in the same family, but different concepts. All right, so we've set the stage on what we mean by DEI, how it relates to fair housing. So what can we do about it? We could probably spend all day talking about solutions alone, and I know we don't have that type of time, so I'm going to focus on 3 key areas: policy reform, community engagement, and education. Policy reform is probably the hardest one of the 3. It's definitely a long battle, and today is not the day for us to figure out how to tackle all of the policy challenges. But what's certain is if we knew what to do and how to do it, we would have done it by now, right? It's a long battle, but we're really at a time in our industry where we have to do something about policy reform. We're very behind nationally in the number of housing units we need, so we really have no choice but to take action. When I talk to different realtors or different associations, I often ask them, what are the greatest challenges you're seeing? And supply is almost always the answer, the number one answer. And you hear a lot of numbers. I hear the US is 5 million units short right now. And of course, the amount of units that are affordable or even attainable, as I like to say nowadays, because you have a lot of people well above the area and median income that are still struggling, those units are growing smaller and smaller in terms of availability. I was really happy to hear John speak earlier about some things that's happening in the Oregon legislature, but I did look on you all's Housing and Community Services website and report that you're short 128,000 units for extremely low and very low income households. And then the next 2 decades, you need to build 500,000 more units. Thus, housing supply really is a fair housing issue. And while we don't have redlining anymore, there are still so many policies and practices in place that are related, such as exclusionary zoning. And I often hear that zoning is the new or the modern day redlining, as a lot of localities may have NIMBY or not in my backyard policies and practices in place that make it really difficult to develop at the pace that's needed. The implementation of inclusionary zoning laws could really play a key role in dismantling systemic barriers that have historically marginalized certain communities. Promoting mixed income housing developments, policymakers can foster more integrated and equitable neighborhoods, and realtors really should be at the forefront. And by knowing how to work with a diverse range of clients, you all will be better equipped to help more people buy and sell and be a champion for key public policy initiatives. Next is community engagement. We've all heard the saying, politics is local. I like to say just about everything is local because housing and neighborhoods really vary based on the community, and there are several communities within a locality. So a lot of this work is going to be at the grassroots level. And who are the boots on the ground that know the ins and outs of neighborhoods? You all are, realtors. You're naturally involved. You have a spirit of volunteerism and service. So getting involved with local advocacy groups and other grassroots organizations that are at the forefront of identifying and addressing housing inequities is going to be crucial. Of course, Realtors are a powerful advocacy group. So by collaborating with these local boots on the ground organizations, policymakers and housing authorities can really gain valuable insights into unique challenges faced by diverse communities. I also think from this, Realtors could be instrumental in associations and different organizations fostering public-private partnerships that can really lead to some innovative solutions that leverage resources and expertise from a diverse range of stakeholders. But it's so important that Realtors be engaged in their communities and bring an understanding of DEI to that engagement in order for all of this to effectively pan out. And lastly, I cannot emphasize education enough. That's going to be an ongoing journey. It's going to be at the core of all that we do. And understanding DEI, it requires a lot of education, formally with training such as NAR's Fair Haven, Bias Override, and At Home with Diversity, but also informally. It could be having a conversation with someone who's different from you. It could be any kind of extra documentaries or ways that you take in education in your off time. But you have to educate yourself, not only individually, but as a group, about the past, about the current realities, and then the future demographic shifts that are going to heavily impact our industry. I know you all just heard from representatives of the Women's Council and the multicultural real estate organizations. I really can't stress these partnerships enough. I'm fortunate that I'm a member of and get to work with all 4 multicultural real estate organizations that are on the screen, and really understanding the nuances of the individual markets they serve. As Realtors individually and as associations partner with them, it's really going to help us be a stronger force in making sure we're able to work with different groups. Bottom line, take these trainings, read the multicultural reports, bring a lot of that education to you as an individual, but also to your brokerages, your teams, and your associations. And as I prepare to leave you all, I am going to give you some homework because we have to continue learning, right? But I want to just emphasize that, the Fair Housing Act doesn't just ban discrimination. It mandates that jurisdictions that are receiving federal funding for housing, take proactive steps to address housing discrimination and overcoming patterns of segregation and fostering inclusive communities. And the only way to effectively carry out these directives is through understanding and implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion principles. So 3 homework assignments for you all. If you haven't done those trainings I mentioned earlier, go to NAR's website and complete them. Have a conversation with someone who's different than you. Maybe go to a new restaurant with cultural food you've never tried, or try a different church than maybe you normally attend. And I know the Oregon Realtors team is putting together some recommended readings for you all. I definitely recommend you check out one of those books, or if you're not a big reader, a related movie or podcast. But the key is going to be that ongoing education. I know we're a little short for time, probably don't have time for questions, but my contact information is on the screen. I would love to continue having these kinds of conversations with you all as we're growing and strengthening our DEI and fair housing and real estate at large. And I'm really grateful that you've had me join in on your Fair Housing Summit today.
Thank you so much, Leslie. When we were planning, Leslie was the first person we thought of to participate. We appreciate all the knowledge you share with us. I agree with you totally that everything is local and we have to ask people to dance so we can dance.
Yes, we should totally dance.
Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Our final panel today is about practical tips for implementing fair housing. This panel is going to be moderated by Stephen Tran. The panelists are Latasha Beal and Ashley Contreras, 2 current Oregon Realtors and both former diversity committee chairs, and Shail Reuter, Education and Outreach Director for Fair Housing Council of Oregon. So we hope this discussion will explore the subtle, often unintentional ways bias and inequality can show up in real estate practice and how realtors can recognize and avoid them. Our panelists will share real-world examples and tips for navigating tricky client questions, insights on implicit bias, and strategies for fostering inclusive conversations, even in small and rural markets. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Molly. So just to introduce myself, my name is Stephen Tran. I am currently ARIA president, the Asian Real Estate Association of America for the Portland chapter. I'm also on the Oregon Diversity Key Committee as well. I just wanted to give everyone a moment to introduce themselves. We'll start off with Latasha.
Hi, good morning. Still morning. Yep. So I'm happy to be here. My name's Latasha Beal. As mentioned, I was the former chair of the Diversity Key Committee, been licensed since 2009 in Oregon, since 2016 in Washington.
And Ashley?
Morning, everyone. Ashley Contreras. I've been a realtor in Salem, Oregon since 2016. I am the immediate past chair for the Oregon Realtors Diversity Committee and have spent the last several years being involved at my local state association and in Oregon Realtors as well. Happy to be here.
Great. And Shao?
I'm Shail Reuter. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm Education and Outreach Director at the Fair Housing Council of Oregon. I have been at the Fair Housing Council for 9 years. However, I've been teaching about fair housing law since 2002.
Okay, great. And we'll just jump right in with our first question. What are some common practices, intentional or not, that real estate professionals or landlords engage in that perpetuate inequality?
Well, I'll jump right in. I think one of the ways is just tolerating clients who want to participate in violating fair housing, retaining those clients, not educating those clients. I think that definitely helps perpetuate inequality.
Yeah. What comes to mind for me is not being aware of their own personal biases and maybe projecting those in scenarios without even realizing that it's happening. For example, if that doesn't ring an example for someone is, we heard an example earlier, but if you have a listing and you get a lot of different lead calls on it, are you treating every single call the same, whether that person, is immediately pre-qualified or not quite there yet, or do you have a process for that?
And I think some common practices that I think about that are very subtle that people don't realize that they might be engaging in is, if you're working with buyers and they're asking questions like, how are the schools? How is this neighborhood? What we hear a lot of times from realtors is they have a hard time dealing with those questions. Or another question, tell me about your buyer, right? Anytime that you start divulging information that's related to protected class, that can be problematic under fair housing because that can sway if somebody's going to be willing to sell the house, right, to the buyer or not. So certainly, talking about the offer itself, but then offering any information about protected class, that really gets into some problematic areas. And those questions around, how are the schools, right? How's the neighborhood? Some best practices around that, because any answer towards that oftentimes is leaning towards white, dominant, affluent neighborhoods. And that's really problematic. And so instead of answering those questions with, well, what do you mean by good schools? I heard a realtor once say, what she considers a good school is really different for her kiddo because her kiddo's neurodivergent. Whereas other people might be saying, what are good schools? It's like, well, what do you mean by that? And then you really are forcing the people asking those questions to drill down on exactly what they mean. And then it becomes easier to suss out if what they're really talking about is discrimination, whether it's intentional or unintentional. I think also some other common practices is around advertising of units, and we'll see the advertisement of units advertising the people rather than the property. And it's really important to focus on advertising the property, not the people. That makes sense.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and if I can add to Shail's point about how being really careful about the language we use and like the sentiments we express around neighborhoods. And I think it's easy to think negative, that like it's only the negative comments that are detrimental. Like, I don't know if you'd feel, this isn't quite the, but also I think when we make positive comments like, oh, I love this neighborhood, or my kid goes to the school next over, over here, you're also steering and implying with those types of sentiments just as much as with like negative or, this isn't quite the safest neighborhood type sentiments as well.
Gotcha. And Ashley, I know you mentioned basically people having their own implicit biases or unknown biases. Is there any way that we can educate ourselves better to eliminate those, or at least make sure that we're aware?
Absolutely. Trainings exist through NAR. Bias override is a super accessible one. And trainings like this are really beneficial to take several times, even if you have in the past. We're such complex beings, we have so much that make up like how we perceive our surroundings, and that changes, maybe if you got enough sleep or if you were hungry when so I think every couple of years revisiting trainings like Bias Override, like Fair Haven 2.0, which I'm excited to take the new version, is really owning your own journey and educating yourself, with these tools.
Great.
And I would just add, being aware that you have bias. I think sometimes it becomes like a bad word, but we all have bias because we all grew up different. We all grew up with different parenting. We grew up in different schools. We grew up with different environments, different traumas. And so the bias that I have is not going to be the same as Ashley's bias or Shile's bias, right? But acknowledging that you have it is also a good first step in being able to counter it.
Okay, great. What are some common but overlooked actions that could unintentionally lead to a fair housing violation?
I think some of them, I think Shal hit them on the head. I think it's being consistent in your practices, kind of like what Ashley was saying. Are you treating all your leads the same? Are you requiring pre-approval for a certain group of people before you show, but not a certain group of other people before you show? Are you discussing crime rates and demographics of the neighborhood? I think it's just important. Again, this neighborhood has great schools, could be interpreted as a code for racial or socioeconomic steering, right? Like Shia was saying. So I think it's important that we have to know that we're considered the expert. We're considered the person who has the experience and professionalism in the industry. So our words are taken very heavily by our buyers and sellers. They're leaning on us. And so any offhand comment, they could be taking that very seriously and calculating or, removing that calculation from their idea of where to live.
Mm-hmm. I think so much of this too can be established by having a really solid consultation. I'm very disinterested in meeting somebody at a property for the first time. I feel like I am not able to serve them at the highest level. I'm not, it's like it feels to me like I'm meeting someone halfway through the process. And so I really enjoy an initial consultation, whether it's over Zoom or a sit down at my office. That really allows me to express like how I work and to set the client's expectations too for fair housing boundaries. And I'm really comfortable telling clients what I will not do, and so I think all realtors should get more comfortable knowing when they're allowed to say or empowered to say, I won't answer that. And if it makes you a little uncomfortable, then get better at your consultations and establishing that on the front end, and you won't have issues later on when it comes up. Hey, you're showing a property. They ask about, what do you think about this neighborhood? Remember in our initial consultation, I'm a fair housing focused realtor, so that isn't something that I'm going to share my personal opinion with you on today, but there's plenty of resources. Here's some other ways to get that kind of insight.
Fair housing focused realtor. I love that, Ashley.
I love that.
Hashtag.
Something that Latasha touched on that I want to go back to is around the importance of being consistent. And so I think one of the sort of like silent ways that realtors might be accidentally violating fair housing is not having consistent practices around how they're working with clients. So Ashley's saying, I like to meet with people for a consultation before I take them to the property. And so it's really like that consistency in practice is really important, because from a fair housing perspective, one of the things that we look at for violations is that realtor or is that housing provider being inconsistent in how they, apply their practices? There was, our very first speaker talked about the importance of just slowing down in working with folks. And really, as you're thinking as a realtor about how you're going to best support your clients, really think about what practices would best support people who might be most impacted by housing discrimination, and then create regular practices around those who are most impacted. And then what you're doing is actually creating better practices that support everybody that you're working with.
Great. Yeah, and I just wanted to bring up an example of alien land laws across the country that are popping up. I don't know if you're familiar with the alien land laws that popped up in Florida that are preventing people of Chinese, Venezuelan, Russian, North Korean, among other countries from purchasing properties near farm or military bases. And that actually blocks um, people of those nationalities from purchasing within 97% of the entire state of Florida. And, that's something that we had to talk about at our housing policy summit for ARIA. And, it wasn't a huge concern prior to this administration. And now there's concern that this may spread nationally. But this is, in a sense, not a situation where it'd be unintentionally a fair housing violation, but it would be basically, you would be violating the law if you would help someone of these specific nationalities purchase property in this state, basically. But at the end of the day, like, it's a fair housing violation to be asking them of their specific nationality. So there's often situations that are unintentional, as you mentioned, and here it's actually intentional where you have to pick a side that you're trying to not violate. So there's that example as well.
Right. And, that's really reminiscent of the alien land laws that were passed into law in the 1920s when we in this country saw a rise of the Klan and, white supremacist ideals. So this is a replay of history repeating itself. Something interesting to watch is that there is a House bill right now in Oregon. It's passed the Senate. It has a lot of support. It's in the House right now. And it's around creating protections for people around immigration status. So federal status creates basically, your federal laws will create a minimum around fair housing, and then states can add additional protections. And so very likely within the next month or so, we are going to see additional protections added for people based on immigration status, which that can really affect home buying, because we've heard about discrimination happening with folks that are using ITIN numbers to get loans, that they're getting higher rates on their loans than people who just have regular social security numbers. So this can be really, this is a great way to change the system to create more protections so we don't see in Oregon what we see happening in Florida.
Yeah, no, that's a great example of what's happening here right now, and and how we can try to avoid that, though it's a tricky dance. That's what I would say, and a slippery slope for sure.
Yes.
Okay. Next question is, sorry. How would you not answer questions about neighborhoods such as these? Is this a good neighborhood? Is there a lot of crime here? And how are the schools? I know we brought this up, but I would love everybody's opinion on this.
I'll jump in. Always be ready to have resources available for your clients based on neighborhoods, based on schools, based on parks, whatever their interest is. And to Ashley's point about that home buyer consult, that is your chance to really find out what your buyer needs and what they're looking for and why they're looking for it, so that you can really be able to create that search parameter that's going to present to them the homes that they want to look at. And let the client lead you, let the client guide you. If they want to live in this zip code, we're looking in this zip code. If they don't want to look in these zip codes, we're not looking in those zip codes. We're basically looking for what the buyer wants. And, if they want to know, is this a good school? What's important for a good school for you? Like I have a nephew who's all about lacrosse right now. So that's really important to him in a high school, right? And I have a niece who has special needs. Not as important that they have a strong lacrosse program, so it's definitely important that you push it back to the client. What's important to you? What's a safe neighborhood to you? What's a good neighborhood to you? And then you can give them resources to look at other neighborhoods, encourage them to drive neighborhoods. But you never want to be the one saying, these are really good ones, these are really bad ones, or these are the ones I prefer. Again, remember, your comments are weighted way more heavily than just having a conversation with their neighbor.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, those questions don't come up because a lot of times, because we've dealt with that sort of sentiment in our consultation, I would say if you are going to be a resource sharer, it would be best to have a consistent list of your resources and make sure that you send them every single time to every single client, like, your links if you're going to do crime links and such. But I think these days most folks are pretty savvy with their Google searches, and they can get on their local police website or their local school district website. But I deal with that in the front end at my consultation. These are the things like the structure itself, the condition of the property, the values, how they've changed over time. Those are 100% the things I can help you with. But when it comes to the surrounding neighbors, the neighbors surrounding it, the location in general, that's where you're going to find me not sharing my personal sentiment with you, client. And in my 9 years, guess how many people have gotten mad at me over that? None. None, because they know, and it makes sense to them when you establish that rapport from the beginning.
And I don't have anything additional to add.
I was wondering how you would deal with a client who may be pushing their own personal views that maybe, in a sense, maybe not as what's the word? That would
Right, somebody who's engaging in discriminatory speech.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think the idea of just being really upfront. I'm a realtor and I'm bound to follow fair housing law, and fair housing law indicates, right? And I really think just being very clear and upfront. Fair housing law says I can't speak towards that. Fair housing law says that I can't give you that information. Fair housing law says that, your talk is basically blocking equal access to housing for groups that deserve equal access. So, I think just being really straightforward about that is the best policy.
I agree. And I know RAF, and I'm not sure if OR Forms has one, but I'm sure they do, just a advisory about fair housing. And I know realtors who, when they've struggled with sellers saying, well, I don't want to sell to this group or that group, they just walk them through that fair housing advisory disclosure and say, well, this is what the law says. So what you're asking me to do is break the law, and I'm not comfortable breaking the law. And a lot of times I've heard that's gone well. I'm with Ashley on the front end. When you have those conversations, it seems to kind of stop any of that discriminatory talk about others or anything. It's just more the focus is on the property and finding the right property for the family.
Great. Yeah, I know there's a lot of people, a lot of agents who may want to be avoiding conflict and may go with the flow in those types of situations. So that's really good feedback on how people can approach those types of situations where they may not feel comfortable going along with discriminatory talk.
And I would encourage, sorry,
go ahead, Ashley. No, go ahead.
I would encourage folks that maybe are kind of stuck in that place, to consider the way that I think about it is, we realtors over the last 100 years of selling houses in all these communities, we have such huge reach and influence over how our country looks, how our communities look, from that sign call, that answering that lead, taking the time to educate them. Like, we really do shape our communities. And so there's so much also in our jobs that has to do with doing the right thing when nobody's looking. And to me, this is that, it's just, you have to kind of look within yourself and want to do the right thing because it's the right thing, even if you may not get, see that reward from it.
And it's a great opportunity to stand up for justice. It's a great opportunity to say, I don't see that community that way. Yeah, I don't, right? Like, I know people that don't fit that stereotype at all. That's actually stereotyping, and educating them and letting them know you're taking a stand, and they'll know, like, ooh, we can't make those jokes around her. And that's a good thing, because maybe they'll think twice before they make that joke to somebody else or that comment to somebody else.
That's some great feedback for sure. Next question is, do you have any advice or tips on how to start conversations with a local diversity group in a small rural MLS?
I would check in with Oregon Realtors Diversity Committee. Molly is amazing, and she has a plethora of resources at her hand. But I also think talking with your local association, also letting them know you're interested in it, finding allies who are interested in it also. I think those are all really good first steps.
Yeah, I would suggest connecting with your AE and they're aware, but usually local associations have metrics they need to meet to satisfy NAR standards, and one of them is regarding fair housing or putting on a fair housing event. So there are, there are huge benefits to bringing up fair housing conversations and opportunities to your local. And if maybe and also introducing them to trainings that are available, like bias override, like Fairhaven, can you get a group class going, or facilitate some sort of talk back after a class like that. A lot of times going to NAR sources maybe that gives you a little bit more clout and momentum to kind of say, hey, NAR is doing this, can we model this here locally? Some places to start.
And I want to I do fair housing trainings throughout the state for realtors. And I will say that I've done trainings in certain rural areas of the state where there have been realtors in the room while I'm doing that training that are really hostile towards fair housing. And then getting a message on the side from a realtor of color that's in the room that says, here's the things I'm seeing around discrimination that's happening. So I think it's important to call out that discrimination, we're not just talking about possible discrimination that's happening between the realtor and the client. It's also discrimination that can be aimed towards the realtor. So I think that that's where it's really important to lean into the diversity key committee, like Latasha is talking about, lean into Oregon Realtors, the larger organizations that have support already built in place, so that somebody's not sort of building the groundwork just by themselves, because you don't know if other realtors have also been contacting Oregon Realtors to say, we want to have these conversations. That's where I start to see power in those rooms, where there might be a realtor that's engaging in discriminatory speak inside of a training, and then other realtors are messaging me on the side. And it's like, those are the two people that need to be getting together and need to be talking about this, because there is safety in numbers, right? There is safety as we talk about this, in community with like-minded people.
Great. No, thank you so much. What role does implicit bias play in how realtors treat and advocate for their clients?
Yeah, biases can lead us to treat people differently based on their identity, which leads to discrimination without our even knowing it. So that's why I was saying, knowing that you have it, regardless of whether you don't have to engage in it to know that you have it, but it does drive our response and our behavior and even our body language. And based on the Fairhaven study, how that showed up most often was in denial of equal services and steering. So I don't think you would be comfortable in that neighborhood, or you probably don't want to live on a busy street. And it might seem like you want to be in the city now, but you're going to want to have family. Oh, but you should be in the city. You don't want to be in that neighborhood, right? Like, based on who that person is, changing where you think they should live instead of asking them where they think they should live. And then even in those situations, they found that when they were getting them listings, people of color were getting less listings, right? Maybe more filtering out was happening for those folks. And so just making sure that you're aware. I think one of the easiest ways to avoid it is that consistent checklist. I ask all my buyers the same question. We can't be like, oh, I have a brown buyer, I'm going to ask these questions, or I have a buyer that has this specific disability, I'm going to ask these questions. If you think to yourself, I need to ask this person if they want a bedroom on the main floor, then you ask all your clients if they want a bedroom on the main floor. This is not the time to switch out your processes. To Xiao's point, if you have consistent practices, it's going to be hard for us to say that you are engaging in illegal activity regarding fair housing, because you're like, no, I ask everybody this question, right? And so those consistent, fair questions, that checklist, get with your broker. There's some resources with NAR that will help you, so you have a consistent checklist for every buyer, for every seller.
And I'm with Latasha on this one. Consistency, consistency, consistency. If you walk away with any message from me around fair housing today, I really hope it's that idea of consistency in practice.
Yeah, I just want to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
And I was just gonna say, I think that, it's a sometimes the focus is on a transaction and getting someone, in to show the house to get to a closing, and really rewiring your brain to think about more like the person and the story and the journey and the big picture. If you sit down and they say, I want to sell in a year, we really want these people to be set up for success, and to have stable communities is good for everybody. So yeah, being really curious about your clients and thinking about it more as like a human process than a transaction to get to close.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that, like a lot of the language that you talked about that, it may constitute steering. If you have these conversations with your buyer prior about their preferences in terms of what they want, sometimes that may not turn that into a steering conversation because if they are planning to have a family, well, unless that, steers them into a bad neighborhood. But if it's a house that makes sense for them because of that situation, then maybe it wouldn't be, considered a violation, if that makes sense, because that's something that was disclosed and discussed prior.
Yeah, the client gets to tell me what they want. If they say I want to be in the city, if they say I want to be in a neighborhood that's around a lot of families, like they get to choose where they want to live. The problem happens when I start telling them where I think they should live, or they tell me I like this place and I go, oh no, honey, that's not for you. You'd be happier on this side of town. That's where the steering comes in. Our clients, they get to tell us what they want. It's our job not to tell them what they need based on our experience or our bias.
Yes, exactly. I just wanted to make clarify that the language specifically isn't a violation in itself, but it's the intent and pushing them in a certain direction. And then final question is, what are some ways realtors can better advocate for clients with disabilities?
And I think finding out what their needs are, what are their preferences and priorities. Again, you're going back to that list that you ask everyone all the same questions, and be understanding of reasonable accommodations. Understand what's a reasonable accommodation and what's not. And there's a lot of resources out there to help you with that. But I think that that's going to be key in helping your buyer.
Yeah, I think asking questions and being curious, and I kind of have like a blanket question in mind of, I understand this can be a big, overwhelming, stressful process. Is there anything unique about this for you that I could be tuned into to be more sensitive to your experience? I know some, just kind of, yeah, giving them an opportunity to be vulnerable and human with you, I think could go really far in discovering their needs better.
And I think also looking for opportunities to advocate for that client. I have a friend with cerebral palsy, and when he and his husband went to go buy a home, the title company was trying to force him to actually physically sign a document, which he can't do. Like he can't he has a stamp to do that. And so the title company obviously doesn't realize that they also have to follow fair housing law, and they also have to think about accessibility, and they also have to do reasonable accommodations. So accommodate that stamp rather than a physical signature. So I think that as a realtor, somebody might be able to look for additional opportunities for how to support that client to be successful through the entire process.
Great. Well, I wanted to thank everyone for being on this panel. I don't think we have enough time for a Q&A, but I'm sure if you had any questions, you can reach out directly to the Oregon Realtors Diversity Key Committee. I believe 3 of us are on the committee at this moment, so we're always happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure you can email or contact any of us individually.
Yes, call us.
Thank you.
Email us. Thank you, Stephen, Latasha, Ashley, and Shyle. Your rich and robust conversation gives us all so much to think about and such valuable tips to add to our skill set. I really appreciate your thoughts about implicit bias and how we can all learn more about ourselves to do better. So as we bring today's Fair Housing Summit to a close, on time almost, I want to take a moment to extend a sincere thank you. First, thank you again to our presenting advertiser, First American Title Company, for your incredible support and commitment to fair housing education. We truly couldn't have made today possible without you. A huge thank you to our sponsors, RMLS, Realtor.com, WFG, National Title, Cascade Hassan Sotheby's International Realty, Rise Realty Northwest, and Cross Country Mortgage. Your partnership reminds us that fair housing isn't just about compliance, it's about leadership and community building. I also want to offer a heartfelt thank you to all of our presenters, panelists, and moderators. Thank you for sharing your time, your experience, and your knowledge with us today. Your willingness to lead these important conversations helps strengthen our industry and empowers us to all do better. Without the tireless work of Charlotte Van Werven, Diversity Key Committee members, and Oregon staff, the Fair Housing Summit would not happen. Thank you all for your dedication and commitment. And of course, thank you to all of you, the attendees, for showing up, leaning in, and committing yourself to learning and advancing fair housing in your communities. Your presence here today sends a powerful message that fair housing matters to each of us and that together we are stronger advocates for the people and communities we serve. As we leave today, I hope you'll carry this with you. Doing the right thing in housing isn't always easy, but it's always necessary. It takes courage, it takes consistency, it takes kindness. And it starts with each of us every day in every conversation, every transaction, and every opportunity to make a difference. Please look for our post-event survey in your email. Your feedback is invaluable in making the Fair Housing Summit better every year. Every year is different, so please look for it next year. Thank you for being a part of this important work. Let's continue to lead with heart, stand up for what's right, and build a future where everyone truly has a place to call home. Have a great day, and we'll see you next year.